Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you, honey." Aunt Janice slid the file across the table like a warrant, insisting I sign or the IRS would devour everything. She claimed she was saving me before I could lift my pen. The estate lawyer looked up, stating calmly, "That is not how this works." The room went silent as he opened an envelope bearing my grandmother's handwriting. In that moment, I realized the taxes were a lie. My grandmother had not left a gift. She had left a track. My name is Aurora Mitchell, and I had been inside the conference room at Brandon Keller for exactly 4 minutes before my family tried to rob me. The room smelled of lemon polish and old paper, a dry, sterile scent that did nothing to mask the underlying odor of desperation coming from the other side of the mahogany table. My Aunt Janice sat in the center chair, flanked by my cousins, Derek and Mallory. They were arranged like a tribunal, their postures rigid, their eyes fixed on me with a mixture of pity and predatory anticipation. It was a tableau I had seen a dozen times before at Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas parties. But today the stakes were not the last piece of pumpkin pie or the best seat in front of the television. Today the stakes were the legacy my grandmother had left behind. "You are late," Janice said. She did not check her watch. It was a power move, a small, calculated lie designed to put me on the defensive before I had even taken my seat. I pulled out the heavy leather chair opposite them and sat down, placing my bag on the floor. "It is 2:00 exactly, Janice. I am not late." She waved her hand dismissively, the gold bracelets on her wrist clattering together with a sharp metallic sound. "It does not matter. We had a crisis, Aurora, a significant one. We did not want to worry you with the details, knowing how overwhelmed you get with financial matters, but we are out of time." I said nothing. I just watched her. In my line of work, silence is often the most effective tool in the room. I work in compliance and cyber risk assessment for Northgate Risk Systems. My entire career is built on spotting anomalies, identifying threats, and waiting for bad actors to reveal themselves. My family, however, still viewed me as the drifting niece, the one who worked with computers in a basement somewhere and probably needed help balancing a checkbook. Janice slid a thick manila file folder across the polished wood. It stopped inches from my hands. "The IRS is going to place a lien on the entire estate," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We received notice this morning. The taxes on the estate are astronomical, much higher than we anticipated. If we do not act by 5:00 today, they will freeze everything, the house, the accounts, the plaza, everything." Derek leaned forward, tapping a pen against the table. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, but it fit him poorly across the shoulders. "It is a bloodbath, Aurora," he added. "They want 40% immediately. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in immediate liquidity that the estate just does not have." Janice nodded gravely. "I have spoken to a specialist, a CPA who handles high-risk audits. There is a way to save the core assets, but we have to move fast. We have to trim the fat to save the body." She reached out and flipped the folder open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a spreadsheet printed in landscape mode with old red numbers in the bottom right corner. "The Briar Hollow Annex," she said. "The old warehouse grandma left you. It is the liability. The valuation came in too high, and it is triggering a luxury tax bracket on the rest of the inheritance. It is dragging the whole ship down." I looked at the paper. It was a mess of jargon words like aggregate liability and immediate levy seizure thrown together in a way that looked terrifying but made absolutely no syntactic sense to a tax professional. "So what is the plan?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "You need to sign it over," Janice said today. "Right now, if you transfer the deed to me, I can bundle it with the commercial properties in the plaza. I can absorb the tax hit through my company, write it off as a distressed asset, and pay the IRS the settlement fee. I am willing to take that loss for you, Aurora, to save the family." She pushed a second document toward me. It was a quitclaim deed already filled out. "I am doing this to protect you," she continued, her eyes wide with manufactured sincerity. "You cannot afford the taxes on that place. Aurora, it is a ruin. The IRS will seize it anyway, and they will garnish your personal wages for the difference. I am offering you a lifeboat." I looked at the deed. Then I looked at the spreadsheet. The CPA listed at the top was a name I did not recognize, and the formatting suggested it had been made in Excel by someone who had only learned to use the software yesterday. The door to the conference room opened, and Elliot Brandt walked in. Mr. Brandt was 70 years old, wearing a three-piece suit that looked as if it had been tailored in 1950. He was the kind of lawyer who still used a fountain pen and dictated letters to a secretary. He had been my grandmother's attorney for 40 years. He carried a distinct air of authority, the kind that did not need to raise its voice to be heard. He sat at the head of the table, placing a thick stack of files down with a heavy thud. He looked at Janice, then at Derrick and Mallory, and finally at me. He did not smile. "Good afternoon," he said. "I see the family has gathered." "Mr. Brandt," Janice said, her voice pitching up an octave, "thank goodness you are here. We were just explaining the tax emergency to Aurora. We need to execute a transfer of the annex immediately to stop the IRS lien. I have the paperwork ready." Brandt frowned. He reached over and took the spreadsheet from in front of me. He put on his reading glasses, wire-rimmed and perched on the end of his nose, and scanned the document. The room was silent for 10 seconds. It felt like 10 years. Then he looked at the quitclaim deed. He read the header, the property description, and the clause where I would surrender all rights for the sum of $1. He took his glasses off and set them on the table. "This is not how this works," he said. The sentence hung in the air, flat and heavy. "Excuse me," Janice said, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "This," Brandt said, tapping a finger on the spreadsheet. "This is gibberish," Janice stiffened. "I beg your pardon. That was prepared by a certified public accountant." "It was prepared by a fool," Brandt replied. "There is no such thing as a luxury bracket trigger based on a single asset's valuation in the state of Pennsylvania. Estate taxes are calculated on the total gross estate minus deductions. Furthermore, the IRS does not issue liens via email threats with a 500 deadline like a kidnapper in a bad movie. They send certified mail, and the process takes months, usually years." He slid the paper back toward her with a look of mild disgust. "And even if there were a tax liability," Brandt continued, his voice hardening, "the estate pays it. The executive liquidates cash reserves or sells assets at fair market value to cover the debt. The beneficiary does not gift real estate to an aunt to avoid a tax bill. That is called fraud." Janice swore at the very best tax evasion. "If you filed this, you would go to prison." Janice's face flushed a deep blotchy red. She shifted in her seat, smoothing her skirt. "Well, perhaps the terminology is simplified. I asked him to make it understandable for Aurora. You know, she does not understand these things. She is not a business person. Elliot, she works in what is it you do, dear, tech support." She looked at me with that pitying expression again. "I am just trying to help her. If she keeps that building, the upkeep alone will bankrupt her. I am offering to take the burden off her shoulders." Brandt ignored the jab at my career. He turned his chair slightly to face her fully. "You are offering to take a property off her hands for $1. Property that she owns free and clear. It is for the family trust." Janice snapped, her mask slipping. "It belongs to the family. It should be managed by the executive. I am just trying to consolidate the holding so we can manage the overhead." Brandt sighed. He looked tired. He opened the thick file he had brought with him. "That brings us to the next point," he said. "You are not the executive, Janice." The silence that followed this statement was profound. Derrick stopped tapping his pen. Mallory looked up from her phone for the first time. Janice looked as if she had been slapped. "What did you say?" she whispered. "I am the eldest," Janice said, her voice rising. "I have been running mother's affairs for the last 5 years. I have power of attorney." "You had power of attorney," Brandt corrected. "That power ceased the moment your mother's heart stopped beating. As for the executive, the last will and testament names the First Keystone Bank's trust department as the independent executive. Your mother updated it 6 months ago." "6 months," Janice repeated, the color draining from her face. "That is impossible. She would have told me." "She did not tell you." Brant said because she did not want you to know. He pulled a document from the file and regarding the Briar Hollow Annex. You seem to be under the impression that it is part of the chaotic general estate or the family trust. It is not. He adjusted a paper clip, his movements deliberate and slow. Your mother deeded the Briar Hollow Annex to Aurora 3 years ago. It was a direct transfer. The deed was recorded. The taxes have been paid annually by your mother on Aurora's behalf as a gift, and the title is currently held in a single-member LLC named AM Holdings. The estate does not own it. The trust does not own it. You cannot use it to pay estate taxes because it is not part of the estate. It is private property. Brad looked at me then. It was the first time he had made direct eye contact with me since the explanation began. Aurora, he said, you do not have to sign anything. In fact, I would advise you to burn that quitclaim deed. I sat there feeling the weight of the moment settling onto my shoulders. I looked at Janice. She was trembling. It was not sorrow. It was rage. She had walked into this room convinced she was the smartest person at the table, convinced that she could bully me into handing over my inheritance before the body was even cold. She had brought a fake spreadsheet. She had lied about the IRS. She had tried to steal from me in front of a witness. But here's the thing. I was not surprised. When I looked at her, I did not see a grieving daughter. I saw a desperate woman who had just realized that her cash cow was gone. I saw the panic behind her eyes, and I remembered the last conversation I had with my grandmother. Just a few weeks before she passed, she had held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman who was fading so fast. They will come for you, Aurora, she had said. They will come with smiles and they will come with threats. They will tell you that you are weak and that they are strong. But you remember this. The annex is yours. I gave it to you for a reason. Keep your eyes open, and when they lie, let them. I looked back at Brant. Thank you, Mr. Brant, I said. My voice was calm. I did not raise it. I did not shout at Janice. I did not accuse her of the attempted theft that had just taken place. Janice stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous, she spat. Mother was not in her right mind 6 months ago. We all know that. She was confused. She was medicated. If she changed the will, it was under undue influence. We will contest this. You hear me, Elliot? We will contest everything. That is your right, Brant said, closing the file. But I drafted that codicil. I videotaped the signing. I have a statement from her physician regarding her capacity on that day. If you want to spend the estate's money fighting the battle, you will lose. That is your choice. But the annex is off the table. It is not yours to fight over. Janice turned her glare on me. Ymir, she hissed. You sat there and let me talk, and you knew the whole time. I did not know about the executive change. Actually, that was a pleasant surprise. But I knew about the deed. I had known for 3 years. I had kept the secret just as my grandmother had asked. Let them think it is worthless. She had told me. Let them think it is nothing until the day it means everything. I am going to verify all of this, Janice said, gathering her purse. Come on, Derek. Mallory, we are leaving. We need to hire our own counsel. This firm clearly has a conflict of interest. Brant didn't blink. As the corporate executive is an independent bank, I represent the estate's interests, not yours, Janice. So, yes, finding your own counsel would be a wise move, especially considering the audit that the bank will likely perform on your use of the power of attorney funds over the last 5 years. Janice froze at the door. Her back went rigid. For a second, she looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. She did not turn around. She just pushed the door open and marched out. Derek scrambled after her, shooting me one last dirty look. Mallory lingered for a second, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or fear. Then she followed them, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The room was quiet again. Brant took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. He looked at me, and for the first time his professional mask softened just a fraction. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. Or, he said. Yes, she was, I replied. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a smaller cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with wax, old-fashioned and dramatic, exactly like something she would do. "She left this for you," he said. "She gave me specific instructions. I was to give this to you only if the family attempted to seize the annex immediately following the reading of the will." I took the envelope. My name was written on the front in her shaky, spidery script. "If they had been kind," Brant said, staring at the door where Janice had just exited, "if they had been fair, you would never have seen this letter." "But she knew they wouldn't be," I said. Brant nodded. "She knew." I held the letter in my hands. I did not open it yet. I didn't need to. The weight of it told me everything. This wasn't just a letter. It was a map. My grandmother hadn't just left me a piece of property. She had left me a weapon, and she had timed the detonation perfectly. Janice thought she was playing a game of checkers where she could flip the board if she was losing. She didn't realize that my grandmother had been playing three-dimensional chess for the last decade of her life. I stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Brant." He stood as well and shook my hand. "Be careful, Aurora. Your aunt is well. You saw her. She is not going to stop. She has liabilities she hasn't disclosed. I can see it in the paperwork she tried to pass off today. Desperate people do dangerous things." "I know," I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder. I walked out of the office and into the cool autumn air of Cedar Ridge. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun setting behind the skyline. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Janice. "This isn't over. You are making a mistake. I can still save you if you sign." I looked at the message and deleted it. She was right about one thing. It wasn't over. It had just begun. But she was wrong about who needed saving. Janice wasn't trying to pull me onto the lifeboat. She was trying to stand on my shoulders to keep her own head above water. I got into my car, a sensible 4-year-old sedan that Derrick had sneered at in the parking lot, and placed the letter on the passenger seat. I would go to the annex tonight. I would sit in the dark of that old warehouse, surrounded by the hum of my servers and the blinking lights of the life I had built in secret, and I would read what she had to say. I put the car in drive. The rear view mirror showed the law office shrinking behind me. I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward to the war that had just been declared. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the victim. I felt like the one holding the match. The drive from the law office to the Briar Hollow Annex took 20 minutes, winding through the upscale suburbs of Cedar Ridge, where my family lived, down into the industrial rust belt that hugged the river. As the manicured lawns gave way to cracked pavement and chain-link fences, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest loosen. This was the landscape of my exile, the place where my family thought I had landed because I was not smart enough or ambitious enough to stay on the hill. They were wrong. Of course, I had not landed here. I had dug in here for as long as I could remember. The Mitchell family narrative had been written in bold gold-plated font, and I was the typo they tried to ignore. In a family of peacocks, I was the gray moth on the wall. They tolerated me at holidays, mostly because it made them feel benevolent to have the poor relation at the table. I remembered the barbecue last 4th of July, just 3 months before my grandmother died. It was the perfect encapsulation of our dynamic. My cousin Derek had just leased a new convertible, a sleek German machine that he had parked on the grass, practically touching the picnic table so no one could miss it. He was holding a beer, leaning against the hood, holding court. It does 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. Derrick had bragged, his voice carrying across the yard. "I am telling you, real estate is booming. I closed 3 deals this month. 3. That is just how you grind." Mallory was nearby, nodding aggressively. She ran a boutique really firm that mostly sold overpriced condos to retirees. She was wearing a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, scrolling through her phone with manic energy. "You have to spend money to make money," she had chimed in. "Speaking of which, Aurora, are you still doing that computer thing?" "What is it again?" "Tech support." I had been sitting on the edge of the patio nursing an iced tea. I worked for Northgate Risk Systems. It was a boutique firm that handled high-level compliance auditing and cyber risk mitigation for Fortune 500 companies. When a bank needed to know if their new payment gateway had a back door, they called us. When a healthcare provider needed to secure patient data against ransomware, they called me. I spent my days hunting invisible predators in the digital undergrowth. It was high stress, high stakes, and incredibly lucrative. But to my family, I was just the girl who could fix their printer if they yelled loud enough. I am in risk management, I had said quietly. Derek had laughed. A short barking sound. Risk management. That sounds like a fancy way of saying you install antivirus software. Look, if you ever want a real job, let me know. I know a guy who manages an IT help desk at the hospital. It is steady work. Might even get you benefits. I had smiled. A tight, thin thing. Thanks, Derek. I will keep that in mind. I never told them. I never told them that my base salary was double what Derek made in a good year. I never told them that my quarterly bonuses could buy his car outright. I stayed silent because silence was safe. If they knew I had money, the dynamic would change. I would go from being the object of their pity to the object of their envy. And in this family, envy was a far more dangerous emotion. They wanted me small so they could feel big. They needed a baseline of failure to measure their own mediocrity against. My grandmother was the only one who saw the truth. She had driven me out to the annex 3 years ago on a rainy Tuesday when the rest of the family thought she was at a bridge club. We stood in front of the building, a squat brick structure that had once been a textile storage depot. The windows were boarded up with plywood that had turned gray with rot. The roof had a visible sag in the middle. Weeds grew waist-high through the cracks in the asphalt, reclaiming the parking lot for the earth. To anyone else, it looked like a teared-down project, a liability waiting for a bulldozer. Grandmother had leaned on her cane, staring at the peeling paint on the front door. "Do you know why I bought this place in 1982?" she had asked. "Because it was cheap," I guessed. "Because it is invisible," she had corrected. Everyone else looked at the plaza on Main Street. They looked at the flash and the shine. But this place has three-phase power running directly from the grid. It has reinforced concrete floors capable of holding heavy machinery. It has a basement that stays 60 year-round without air conditioning. She had turned to me, her eyes sharp and clear. "You are like this building. Aurora, the family looks at you and sees the peeling paint. They see the weeds. They do not see the foundation. They do not see the power running underneath." She handed me a heavy iron key. "I am transferring the deed to you. Not when I die, Mal, but you must promise me one thing, anything," I had said, clutching the cold metal. "Do not fix the outside," she had commanded. "Fix the inside. Make it strong. Make it yours. But leave the boards on the windows. Leave the weeds." "Why?" I had asked. "Because the moment you make it look valuable, they will want it," she said. "The most valuable things in life are the ones nobody else bothers to look at twice. If you paint the front door, the tax assessor will come. If you plant flowers, your cousins will ask why you have such a nice asset when you are supposedly struggling. Let them think it is a burden. Let them think you are doing me a favor by taking it off my hands." I had followed her advice to the letter. I pulled my car up to the side entrance of the annex, now navigating carefully around a pothole I had intentionally left unfilled. The building loomed dark and silent against the evening sky. To the casual observer, it looked abandoned. There was a rusted padlock on the front gate, and a condemned sign I had salvaged from a dumpster leaned against the wall, adding a nice touch of decay. But as I keyed in the code on the concealed keypad by the service door, the illusion vanished. The heavy steel door clicked open with a smooth hydraulic hiss. I stepped inside, and the smell of wet concrete and rust was instantly replaced by the sterile hum of filtered air. The interior of the Briar Hollow Annex was a fortress. Over the last 3 years, I had poured nearly $200,000 into the renovation, doing much of the labor myself or hiring out-of-town contractors who signed non-disclosure agreements before they even saw the blueprints. I walked through the soundproofed vestibule and into the main server room. Rows of black server racks hummed with soft blue lights. The air was crisp, kept at a constant temperature by a redundant cooling system I had routed through the old ventilation shafts to hide the exhaust signatures. This wasn't just a warehouse. It was a data center, and a digital forensic staging ground. I had 3 major contracts running currently. One was with a regional law firm that needed secure off-site storage for discovery documents in a massive class action lawsuit. Another was with a forensic accounting firm that needed a clean environment to reconstruct shattered hard drives from corporate fraud cases. And the third was my own project, a massive data scraping operation I ran to monitor compliance risks for my employer. My family thought I was hoarding junk in a damp warehouse. In reality, I was sitting on a digital gold mine that generated a steady 7-figure revenue stream. I sat down at my workstation, a curved desk with 4 monitors, and tossed my keys on the surface. The screens flickered to life, bathing the room in a cool glow. I saw the network status green, stable, secure. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and closed my eyes, letting the hum of the fans wash over me. This was my sanctuary. This was the one place in the world where I did not have to pretend to be lesser than I was. But the peace was fragile. I knew that now. My mind drifted back to the funeral. 2 weeks ago, the service had been tasteful, heavy on lays and light on genuine emotion. Janice had worn a black veil, looking like a grieving widow from a Victorian novel, despite the fact that she had spent the last 5 years complaining about how much work it was to manage grandmother's doctors. At the reception afterwards, held at Janice's pristine suburban home, she had cornered me near the buffet table. I was holding a plate of cold pastor salad, trying to blend into the wallpaper. Poor Aurora, she had said, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. I know mother leaving you. That old annex must feel like a slap in the face. It is essentially a pile of bricks. I am sure she meant well, I had murmured, playing my part. Well, honestly, Janice had continued, sipping her white wine, you should probably look into selling it immediately. The property taxes alone will eat you alive on your salary. I would hate to see you get into debt over a sentimental piece of garbage. I can probably get my accountant to figure out a write-off for you. Maybe we can bundle it into the estate just to get it off your hands. I remember nodding, looking down at my shoes. I will think about it, Aunt Janice. That was the seed. She had planted it right there over cold pasture and cheap wine. She had been testing the waters, seeing if I was desperate, seeing if I was stupid, when I did not immediately beg her to take it. She must have formulated the plan she executed today in the lawyer's office. She did not know about the servers. She did not know about the contracts. She thought she was stealing a copper penny, unaware that it was a rare coin worth millions. My phone buzzed on the desk, jarring me back to the present. I picked it up. It was the text message from Janice again. I had not deleted it from the notification history. Sign it. I am saving you. I stared at the words saving me for 30 years. That had been the narrative. Janice, the savior, the matriarch, the one who held the chaotic Mitchell family together. She saved us from embarrassment. She saved us from bad decisions. She saved grandmother from loneliness, or so she claimed. But looking at the lie in the lawyer's office, the fake spreadsheet, the panicked urgency, the blatant manipulation, I realized the script had flipped. Janice was not trying to acquire the annex because she wanted to expand her empire. People who are expanding empires hire real lawyers and use real spreadsheets. They do not ambush their nieces with threats of IRS liens that do not exist. You do not try to steal a worthless asset unless you are desperate for collateral. She was not saving me from taxes. She was trying to use my asset to plug a hole in her own ship. I pulled up a search window on my center monitor. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the sound sharp and rhythmic like gunfire. I didn't need a private investigator to start. I had access to public databases that most people didn't even know existed. I typed in Janice Mitchell and Mitchell Properties, LLC. I was not looking for tax records yet. I was looking for patents. A window popped up, a civil court docket from 2 counties over, a judgment for an unpaid vendor invoice dated 4 months ago. It was small, only $5,000. But for a woman who drove a Mercedes, an unpaid $5,000 bill was a crack in the dam. I typed in another query. First Keystone Bank. Notice of default. Nothing yet. But the night was young. I looked around my fortress. The blinking lights of the server seemed to wink at me. My grandmother had told me to fix the inside, to make it strong. She had known that one day the storm would come. She had given me a ruin so I could build a bunker. I looked at the text message one last time. "I am saving you." "No, and Janice," I whispered to the empty room. "You are drowning, and you just grabbed onto the only person in the family who knows how to swim." I reached into my bag and pulled out the cream-colored envelope Mr. Brandt had given me. The waxed seal was cool to the touch. I wasn't ready to open it yet. I wanted to sit with this feeling for a moment longer. This cold, hard realization that the people who had looked down on me my entire life were actually standing on quicksand. I turned back to the screen. I had work to do. If Janice wanted a war over paperwork, she was about to learn that she had brought a knife to a drone strike. The assault began at 7 in the morning, not with a knock on the door, but with a digital chime that echoed through my apartment. I was sitting at my kitchen island, nursing a mug of black coffee and reviewing the server logs from the night before, when my phone lit up. It was a notification from the family email chain, a thread I had muted 3 years ago, but never actually left. The subject line read, "Urgent protecting mother's legacy." Bayad Janice had not slept. While I had been securing my network, she had been securing her narrative. I opened the email. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation sent to everyone from my cousins to second cousins in Ohio and even a few distant relatives I had not seen since I was 12. "Dearest family," it began. "It breaks my heart to bring you this news so soon after Mother's passing. We are facing a critical situation with the estate due to unforeseen tax liabilities. I am working tirelessly to resolve this, but I have hit a roadblock. Aurora, in her grief and confusion, is refusing to release a property that is essential to settling these debts. She does not understand the severity of the IRS's position. If we do not act as a united front, the government will place a lien on everything Mother built. Please pray for her to see reason before it is too late." I stared at the screen. She was brilliant in a twisted sort of way. By framing me as confused rather than malicious, she undermined my competence. By invoking the IRS, she triggered a primal fear in every middle-class relative on the list. And by asking for prayers, she claimed the moral high ground. My phone buzzed again. Then again, 3 text messages from relatives asking what was going on. One from a cousin in Pittsburgh asking if I needed a loan. Janice had weaponized the family tree against me before I had even finished my breakfast. I did not reply. In crisis management, you never engage with the noise. You find the source of the signal. At 9:00, the second wave hit. My phone rang, displaying an unknown number. I usually let these go to voicemail, but my instinct told me this was part of the campaign. I pressed the record button on my external capture device, a habit from my line of work, and answered. "This is Aurora," I said. "Mitchell, this is Arthur Davis." A voice boomed. It was deep, harsh, and sounded like it was being projected from the bottom of a barrel. "I am the CPA retained by your aunt, Janice Mitchell. We need to discuss the asset transfer immediately." I leaned back in my chair. "Mr. Davis, I do not recall seeing your name on any engagement letters from the estate. We do not have time for bureaucracy," he snapped. "I have the paperwork on my desk right now. If you do not sign the quitclaim by noon, my firm will be forced to file a preliminary tax evasion notice with the district office. We will freeze your personal accounts. MS. Mitchell, we will garnish your wages. Do you want a federal mark on your employment record?" I paused. The terminology was all wrong. A CPA does not file a tax evasion notice. The IRS conducts audits. They do not take orders from private accountants to freeze accounts on a whim. And federal mark on your employment record sounded like a line from a bad television drama. "Mr. Davis," I said, keeping my voice flat, "which district office are you filing with? The one in Philadelphia or the field office in Harrisburg? And what is your practitioner tax identification number? I would like to verify your standing before we proceed." There was a silence on the other end, a long heavy pause where I could practically hear him blinking. "Look, lady," he growled, dropping the professional facade entirely. "You are playing with fire. Just sign the papers your aunt sent you." He hung up. I saved the recording. This was not professional. This was a scare tactic, a clumsy attempt to bully me into submission, but it worried me, not because I was scared of the fake CPA, but because it showed me how far Janice was willing to go. She was bringing outsiders into this. I needed armor, real armor. I called Nora Baines. Nora was not an estate lawyer like Mr. Brandt. Brandt was a gentleman who believed in the sanctity of wills. Nora was a property shark who specialized in contested probate and hostile real estate litigation. She was 35, razor sharp, and had a reputation for shredding opponents with paper cuts. I met her at her office an hour later. I brought everything: the tax spreadsheet Janice had given me, the email printout, and the recording of the phone call. Nora listened to the recording, her eyebrows climbing higher with every second. When it finished, she let out a low whistle. "That is actionable," she said. "Impersonating a tax official or misrepresenting legal authority to coerce a property transfer. We could file a harassment suit right now." "Not yet," I said. "I do not want to sue her yet. I want to know what she's actually doing. She keeps saying taxes. She is obsessed with it." Nora pulled the spreadsheet toward her. She scanned it, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "This is nonsense, Aurora. Look, Pennsylvania has an inheritance tax. Yes, for a grandchild, the rate is 412%. For a child like Janice, it is 412%. For a sibling, it is 12%. But here is the kicker. The tax is based on the value of the asset at the date of death. Even if the annex was worth $1 million, which it is not on paper, the tax liability falls on the recipient, or the estate pays it from the residual cash." She tapped the paper. "But she is conflating estate tax with inheritance tax. The federal estate tax exemption is over $12 million this year. Unless your grandmother was secretly hiding gold bars in the basement, her estate does not owe a dime to the federal government. There is no luxury tax bracket for old warehouses. Janice is throwing scary words into a blender and hoping you drink it." "So why the panic?" I asked. "Why the deadline? Why the fake CPA?" Nora leaned forward, clasping her hands. "Panic usually comes from two places, Aurora. One, she believes her own lines, which suggests she is incompetent. Or two, she needs that property for something else, and taxes is the only story she thinks will sell to the family." She looked at the email print out again. "She mentions a lien 3 times in this email," Nora noted, "and she mentioned it in the lawyer's office. According to you, the IRS will place a lien. It is a specific fear." I said, "Exactly. Most people say audit or fine. A lien is a specific legal mechanism for debt collection. It is what happens when you have already lost the argument and you are refusing to pay. People tend to project their own nightmares onto others." I felt a click in my brain, a connection forming. "Can we check her?" I asked. "Not the estate. Janice." Nora smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just spotted movement in the brush. "Public records are a beautiful thing," she said. "If she has a judgment in Pennsylvania, it is in the system." While Nora logged into the profanatory database, my phone buzzed again. It was a Google alert I had set up for Briar Hollow Annex. I opened the notification and felt my stomach drop. It was an Instagram story. My cousin Derek, he was standing in front of the annex, my annex. He had applied a gritty filter to the photo, making the building look even more derelict than it was. He was leaning against the rusted gate, giving a thumbs up. The caption read, "Saying goodbye to the old family relic. Shame it has to go to pay the bills. But business is business. Big moves coming soon for the Mitchell portfolio. Real estate grind family first." He had tagged the location. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't the insult that bothered me. It was the exposure. My clients, the law firm, the forensic accountants, they valued discretion above all else. If they saw a local real estate agent posting about selling the facility where their sensitive data was stored, they would panic. They would pull their contracts. "Derek, you idiot," I whispered. I showed the phone to Nora. "They are trying to force a sale. I announcing it," Nora said, her eyes cold. "It is a brilliant move for a teenager. Terrible for a legal strategy. He just admitted public knowledge of the asset status while the title is in dispute." I need to stop this. I said, my clients, we will draft a cease and desist. Nora said, typing rapidly, we will slam Derek with a demand to take that down within the hour or face a suit for slander of title. But first, look at this. She turned her monitor toward me. The screen was filled with rows of text, legal filings. Janice Mitchell. It was not just one entry. There were four. Here, Nora pointed. 2 years ago, a judgment for $45,000 in favor of a commercial interior design supplier. Unpaid. She scrolled down. Last year, a default judgment from a credit card company. $22,000. And here is the big one, Nora said, her voice dropping. 6 months ago, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania filed a tax lien against Mitchell Interiors LLC. That is her staging company, isn't it? Yes. I said she always said business was booming. Business might be booming, but she is not paying her share. Nora said she owes the state $38,000 in back sales tax. That is not an estate problem. Aurora, that is a criminal problem if she collected the tax from customers and didn't remit it. I stared at the numbers. The total debt was over $100,000, and those were just the public judgments. If she was defaulting on vendors in the state, her credit cards and private loans were probably maxed out. She is broke, I said. The realization washed over me. She is drowning in debt, and she is the executive, or she thought she was. Nora corrected. She probably spent the last 5 years dipping into your grandmother's accounts to pay the minimums on these debts, keeping the wolves at the door. But now the accounts are frozen because of the death and the bank has taken over. The cash flow stopped. She needs the annex. I said she needs to sell it to pay her own liens. She needs to sell it to hide the fact that she has been stealing. Nora said if she can get you to sign it over for taxes, she can flip it, pay off her personal tax lien and tell the family she settled the estate issues. She is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you are Peter. The puzzle pieces slammed together. The urgency, the desperation, the fake CPA. She wasn't trying to save the estate from the IRS. She was trying to save herself from bankruptcy and potential fraud charges. Speaking of the fake CPA, Nora said, opening a new tab, I ran that name you gave me, Arthur Davis, and there are 12 Arthur Davis licensed as CPAs in Pennsylvania. Nora said, I called 3 of them while you were in the restroom. None of them know who Janice Mitchell is. And the number he called you from, it is a burner app. I traced the View-It signature. It is a disposable line. So he is an actor, I said, or a friend she owes a favor. He is a fraud, Nora said firmly, and that is our leverage. She hit print. The laser printer in the corner, word to life, spitting out pages of judgments, liens, and the draft of the cease and desist for Derek. Here is the plan, Nora said, handing me the stack. We do not tell them what we know. Not yet. If we reveal the judgments now, she will go to ground. She will destroy evidence. We need to let her think her plan is working, just enough to get her to commit to a formal legal position. We need her to file something with the court stating these lies. You want her to perjure herself, I said. I want her to dig a hole so deep she can't climb out. Nora replied, we are going to build a paper wall. Aurora, we are going to demand documentation for every single claim she makes. You want the annex for taxes. Fine. Show us the IRS assessment. Show us the appraisal. Show us the estate account, ledgers for the last 5 years. She looked me in the eye. She cannot show us those things because they do not exist or they incriminate her. So she will panic, and when she panics, she will make a mistake. I took the papers. I felt a cold calm settling over me. My grandmother had warned me. They will come with smiles and threats. Janice had used up her smiles years ago. Now she was using threats, but threats only work if you are afraid. And looking at the list of Janice's failures printed in black and white, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was just focused. I stood up, sent the letter to Derek. I said, tell him if that post isn't down in 30 minutes, I will sue him for the loss of potential business revenue. And Janice, Nora asked. I pulled my phone out. I had a text from her sent 5 minutes ago. Did Mr. Davis call you? We are running out of time. Aurora. I typed a reply. He called. I am reviewing the numbers. I will need to see the official IRS notice of deficiency before I can sign. My lawyer says it is standard procedure. I hit send. It was the perfect bait. I wasn't saying no. I was asking for paper, and I knew with absolute certainty that paper was the one thing Janice could not produce. Nora grinned. Nice. You are learning. I learned from the best, I said, thinking of the old woman who had handed me a key and told me to keep the boards on the windows. I left Nora's office and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The city looked different now. It wasn't just a collection of buildings. It was a grid of assets and liabilities, of debts and secrets. Janice thought she was playing a game of intimidation. She didn't realize she had just invited a forensic auditor to look at her books. I got into my car and checked Instagram. Derek's post was gone. Round one to the girl in the basement, but I knew Janice wouldn't stop. She couldn't stop. The liens were chasing her, and she had to outrun them. I just had to make sure she didn't use my back as a stepping stone. I drove toward the annex. I had client data to decrypt, and now I had a new investigation to run. I was going to find out exactly where every cent of my grandmother's money had gone for the last 5 years. And when I found it, I was going to make sure the whole family saw the receipt. To find a thief who wears a mask of family loyalty, you do not hire a private investigator. You hire a mathematician with a cynical streak. I found Graham Ives through a recommendation from the legal counsel at Northgate. Graham was not a warm man. He operated out of a small glass-walled office in the financial district that smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive coffee. He was a forensic accountant, a man who spent his life reconstructing the shattered remains of corporate embezzlements and divorce settlements. To Graham, numbers were not just values. They were behavioral footprints. I sat across from him on a Wednesday morning, 2 days after Janice's email blast. The city outside was gray and raining, mirroring the static in my head. I need you to look at the estate, I said, sliding a hard drive across his pristine desk. Specifically, I need you to look at the last 24 months of my grandmother's financial activity. My lawyer, Nora, subpoenaed the bank records as part of the discovery for the executive challenge. We have the raw data. I need you to find the story. Graham picked up the drive. He did not ask how I felt about my grandmother. He did not offer condolences. He simply asked, what is the hypothesis? My hypothesis is that the estate is cash poor because the money did not vanish. It migrated. Graham nodded once, plugged the drive into his air-gapped terminal, and began to type. His hourly rate was $450, and looking at the speed of his fingers, I knew he was worth every cent. We spent the next 6 hours in that room. It was not like the movies. There were no dramatic gasps or sudden musical swells. It was a slow, grinding process of cross-referencing ledger entries with vendor codes. Graham built a pivot table on the main screen, filtering transactions by frequency and recipient. At 2:00 in the afternoon, Graham stopped typing. He took a sip of his lukewarm water and pointed a laser pointer at a cluster of rows highlighted in yellow. Here is your migration pattern, he said. I leaned in. The screen showed a series of withdrawals starting 18 months ago. They were not large enough to trigger automatic federal reporting, mostly under $9,000, but they were consistent every month on the 3rd and the 17th. The description for these transactions was vague. Professional services, consulting, or support maintenance. Who is the vendor? I asked. Graham. Click to sell. The routing number traces back to a business account at a regional credit union. The account holder is listed as JM Design and Staging. My stomach turned over. That was Janice's company. I did the math in my head. 18 months, 2 payments a month, averaging $4,000 each. That was nearly $150,000 siphoned out of my grandmother's liquidity before she even died. She was paying herself, I whispered. Graham pulled up a second document. This was the preliminary expense report Janice had filed with the probate court before Mr. Brand had stopped her. In the notes section, she had justified similar withdrawals as caregiving stipends and home management fees. Graham adjusted his glasses. There is a problem with her narrative. If these were caregiving expenses, They should be classified as W-2 wages or paid to a medical agency. If they are reimbursements for expenses, there should be receipts matching the amounts, but these are round numbers. 4,000 flat, 3,500 flat. Life does not happen in round numbers. Aurora, expenses have cents, fraud has round numbers. He typed another command, and a graph appeared. It showed my grandmother's ending monthly balance dropping like a stone, inversely proportional to the deposits appearing in Janice's business timeline, which Graham had inferred from the outgoing transfers. This is not reimbursement, Graham stated flatly. This is income. She was treating your grandmother like a client who does not check the invoices. I stared at the screen, and suddenly a memory from last Christmas hit me hard enough to make me WSC. I had gone to visit grandmother at the big house. She had been sitting in the sunroom, surrounded by piles of mail. She looked frail, her hands shaking as she tried to open an envelope. Aurora, she had said, her voice trembling. I cannot find my bank statement. I wanted to see if the dividend check came in, but Janice says they went digital. She says she changed the password for me because I kept forgetting it. I remembered my reaction. I had been busy. I had a deadline at work. I had patted her hand and said, that is probably for the best. Grandma, passwords are tricky. Janice is just helping you stay organized. I had dismissed her fear as confusion. I had handed the keys to the thief because I was too busy to check the locks. Guilt is a cold thing. It settled in my gut, heavy and sharp. Janice hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen my grandmother's autonomy. She had gaslighted an old woman into believing she was incompetent, so she could rob her blind. Is there more? I asked, my voice tight. Graham didn't look at me. He knew better than to acknowledge the emotion in the room. He just clicked to the next tab. Yes, there is a loan. He highlighted a transaction from 10 months ago, a lump sum transfer of $50,000. The recipient was redacted in the bank statement, listed only as outgoing wire. Title company. A title company. I asked. Did she buy a property? No. Graham said. I cross-referenced the county recorder's office. Your grandmother did not buy or sell any real estate in that window. However, look at the repayments. He pointed to the inflow column. Starting 1 month after the $50,000 wire, there were inbound transfers of $400 a month coming from Janice's personal checking account. She borrowed $50,000. I said, and she is paying it back at $400 a month. At that rate, Graham said, calculating quickly, it would take her over 10 years to pay the principal, assuming zero interest. But here's the catch. The payment stopped the day your grandmother died. I looked at the dater. He was right. The moment the heart stopped, the payment stopped. Janice had decided the debt died with the creditor. I called Noor immediately. I put her on speakerphone so she could hear Graham's breakdown. When Graham finished explaining the consulting fees and the loan, the line was silent for a long moment. This changes the posture of the case, Nora said, her voice losing its usual lawyerly detachment and becoming something sharper. We are moving out of civil dispute territory. This is statutory elder financial exploitation. What does that mean for the annex? I asked. It means we have a nuclear option, Nora explained. In Pennsylvania, if we can prove a fiduciary used their access to exploit a dependent adult, we can petition to have them disinherited entirely, not just the annex, everything. We can claw back every dime she took, plus triple damages and legal fees. I looked at the graph on the screen, the visual representation of my aunt's betrayal. I do not want to destroy her just to destroy her. I said I want the truth. I want it so clear that even Derrick and Mallory cannot spin it. I want to walk into that courtroom and not say a word. I want the paper to do the talking. Then we need one more link. Graham interrupted. He spun his monitor around to face me directly. I have been trying to reconcile the monthly service fees. He said most of them are standard utilities, insurance, cable, but there is one fee that stands out. It is small, $45 a year, a safety deposit box. I said, correct, but look at the bank. He pointed to the entry, First Keystone Bank, box rental. That is where the trust is held. I said, that makes sense. It makes sense for your grandmother. Graham said, but look at the billing date. The fee is deducted automatically from your grandmother's account, but the box rental agreement number referenced on the statement, it does not match the box listed in her estate inventory. I frowned. What do you mean? The estate inventory lists box number 402. Graham said, we have a contents log for that. Jewelry, birth certificates, the deed to the main house. But this fee is for box number 519, 2 boxes, I said. And here is where it gets interesting, Graham continued. I called the bank's records department this morning, pretending to be a junior auditor verifying an internal code. I asked them to confirm the lay on box 519, and they couldn't, Graham said, because the box is not just in your grandmother's name. It is a joint lease with Janice, I guessed. No, Graham said. If it were Janice, she would have rated it by now. The bank record shows the secondary signer has a different last name, but the system flagged it as restricted access before the clerk could give me the name. He leaned back, tenting his fingers. Whoever is on that box with your grandmother, it is not a Mitchell, and whatever is in that box, Janice does not know about it because if she did, she would have stopped the automatic payment to keep it off the radar. I stared at the number box 519. My grandmother was a woman of secrets. She had given me the annex. She had given me the letter in Mr. Brand's office, but she had kept one piece of the puzzle hidden even from me. Do we have a key? I asked. Graham shook his head. No key in the inventory, which means the other key holder has it, or it is hidden somewhere Janice hasn't looked. I stood up, pacing the small office. The walls were covered in whiteboard marker equations and dates that detailed the systematic looting of my inheritance, but box 519 was a blank space. Nora, I said into the phone, can we get a court order to open that box? We can try. Nora said, but if it is a joint lease, we need to notify the other party. We need a name. I do not have a name, I said, but I might know where to find the key, where Nora asked. The annex, I said. I hung up the phone. Graham looked at me. You think she hid a bank key in an abandoned warehouse? She told me to fix the inside, I said, remembering her voice. She told me the most valuable things are the ones nobody looks at. I grabbed my coat. I am done here for today. Graham, keep digging. If you find a single transaction that bought a pair of shoes or a vacation, I want it flagged. I will find it, Graham said, already turning back to his screen. I walked out into the rain. The city felt tighter now, the pressure mounting. Janice was out there, probably meeting with her fake CPA, plotting her next move to seize the annex. She thought the war was about real estate. She didn't know that the battlefield had shifted. I drove toward the annex, my mind racing. If there was a key, it wouldn't be in a drawer. It wouldn't be under a mat. My grandmother was smarter than that. As I pulled into the lot, the rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the world into gray streaks. I parked the car and ran for the side door, the code already on my lips. I stepped into the cool, humming silence of the server room. I didn't go to my computer. I went to the back wall to the original breaker box from 1982. When I had renovated the place, I had left the old electrical panel in place, bypassing it with modern conduits but keeping the rusted metal cabinet as a relic. It was ugly. It was covered in warning stickers. It was exactly the kind of thing Janice would never touch because she would be afraid of getting her hands dirty. I opened the panel. Wires, long since disconnected, hung like dead vines. But there, taped to the inside of the metal door with a piece of yellowing masking tape, was a small silver envelope. I'd peeled it off. The tape was dry and brittle. It crunched under my fingers. I opened the envelope. Inside was a key. It was stamped with the First Keystone Bank logo and the number 519, and wrapped around the key was a small slip of paper. It wasn't a note. It was a receipt for a consultation with a law firm I had never heard of, dated 5 years ago. The name on the receipt was not my grandmother's. It was Elena Vance. I stared at the name Elena Vance. The name sounded familiar, like a ghost from a story I had heard as a child. And then it clicked. Elena Vance was my grandmother's maiden name, but she hadn't been a Vance for 50 years. Why would she open a safety deposit box under a name she hadn't used since 1960? And why would she do it jointly with someone else? I flipped the receipt over. On the back, in faint pencil, was a single line of text: "For the day the wolf knocks." I held the key tight in my hand. The metal was cold, biting into my palm. Janice was the wolf. There was no doubt about that. But this key opened a door to a history I didn't know existed. I took a picture of the receipt and sent it to Nora with the caption, "Found the key. Get the court order. We are going to the bank." I sat down on the floor of the server room, listening to the hum of the machines. The data on the hard drives was binary ones and zeros, true and false. But families were not binary. They were analog, messy, full of static and distortion. Janice wanted a fight about taxes. She was about to get a lesson in history. And I had a feeling that whatever was inside box 519 was going to rewrite the entire script of the Mitchell family legacy. The sound of leverage is not always a bang or a shout. Sometimes it is the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a Cisco food delivery truck backing up. 2 days after finding the key in the breaker box, I stood on the cracked asphalt behind the Briar Hollow Annex, watching the morning logistics of the Mitchell family plaza. It was a hive of activity. The plaza, which my grandmother had built in the late 80s, was a strip mall that backed directly onto my property. It housed an Italian restaurant, a dry cleaner, a high-end salon, and a boutique coffee shop. Every single one of those businesses relied on the narrow service alley that ran behind their back doors to receive inventory and take out trash. And every single morning for 30 years, those trucks had driven over the pavement that lay between the plaza's rear wall and the annex's side wall. Mr. Henderson, a licensed surveyor with a face like weathered leather and a vest the color of a traffic cone, stood next to me. He was peering through his total station, adjusting the lens with calm precision. Nora stood on his other side, holding a rolled-up blueprint that looked brand new. "Are you sure?" Nora asked, her voice cutting through the humid morning air. Mr. Henderson didn't look up. He just gestured to a spray-painted orange line he had marked on the ground 10 minutes ago. "I am not guessing. MS. Baines," he said. "I have triangulated the corner monuments from the 1952 city plot. The deed descriptions are unambiguous." He walked over to the orange line. It ran parallel to the plaza, about 15 ft away from the back doors of the shops. "This is the property line," he stated, tapping the ground with the toe of his boot. I looked at the line, then I looked at the trucks. The heavy delivery truck for the Italian restaurant was currently parked squarely on my side of the orange paint. In fact, the entire alleyway, the loading zones, the dumpster pads, the employee parking spots was not on plaza land. It was on annex land. For 3 decades, the Mitchell family plaza had been encroaching on the Briar Hollow Annex by nearly 20 ft. They built the plaza right up to the edge of their legal boundary. I realized, speaking aloud, they maximized their square footage for the tenants and just assumed they could use the annex's land for logistics. Nora nodded, a sharp glint in her eyes. "It is worse than that. They did not just assume. They paved it. They treated it as their own because the annex was just Grandma's storage, and she never complained. But Grandma is gone," I said, "and the annex is not storage anymore." Just then, the back door of the Italian restaurant flew open. A man in a grease-stained apron came out, dragging a heavy bag of trash toward the dumpster that was sitting, I now knew, on my property. "Hey, you can't park there," he yelled at Mr. Henderson's truck. "We got a delivery coming in 5 minutes." Nora stepped forward. Her suit was sharp, a stark contrast to the grime of the alley. "Actually," she said, her voice projecting clearly, "you are the one who is parked illegally. In fact, your dumpster is trespassing." The man blinked, confused. "Art, who are you?" "I am the lawyer for the property owner," Nora said, pointing to me. "And we are currently assessing the unauthorized use of this parcel." Before the man could respond, a black Mercedes whipped around the corner of the alley, tires crunching on the gravel. It came to a halt just inches from the orange line. Janice got out. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf that fluttered in the wind, looking like she was arriving on a movie set rather than a back alley. She had clearly been at the coffee shop in the plaza and had spotted the survey crew. "What is this?" she demanded, marching over to us. Or why are there construction people blocking the deliveries? I just got a text from the salon owner complaining about the noise. Good morning, Aunt Janice, I said. We are just clarifying the boundaries. Boundaries. Janice laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. We know the boundaries. The fence is over there. She pointed to a rotting wooden fence at the far edge of the annex lot. That fence was put up by a tenant in 1990 to keep stray dogs out. Mr. Henderson said, stepping in. It has no legal standing. The property line is here. He pointed to the orange paint between Janice's feet. Janice looked down. She looked at the line, then back at the plaza. If the line was real, then the plaza had no back entrance, no loading dock, no fire exit path. It was effectively choked off from the rear. This is ridiculous. Janice spat. We have used this driveway for 30 years. Mother knew it. The whole town knows it. It is a prescriptive easement. We have adverse possession. You cannot just draw a line in the paint and claim the road. Aurora, that is not how the law works. Nora stepped in, smiling that dangerous smile of hers. Actually, Janice, since you brought up the law, let's talk about Pennsylvania property statutes. To claim adverse possession or a prescriptive easement, the use of the land must be hostile. That means it must be done without the owner's permission. She unrolled the blueprint, but we have records showing that your mother, the previous owner of the annex, explicitly gave verbal permission for the deliveries. She allowed it. And in Pennsylvania, if the use is permissive, it can never ripen into an easement, no matter how much time passes. Permission kills the hostility requirement. Janice's face flushed a deep, indignant crimson. She took off her sunglasses. You are splitting hairs. It is family land. The trust owns the plaza, and the annex was mother's, so it was all the same pot. It was never the same pot, I said quietly. You just treated it that way because it was convenient. You expanded the plaza's profitability by using land you didn't pay for. Janice stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and nervous sweat. So what are you going to do, Aurora? She hissed. Are you going to put up a toll booth? Are you going to block the ambulance access? You want to bankrupt the tenants. These are small business owners, families. If you block this road, you are destroying their livelihoods. Is that who you are now? The cruel landlord. She was pivoting, trying to make this a moral issue, because she knew she had lost the legal one. She wanted me to feel guilty. She wanted me to back down to avoid being the bad guy. But I looked at the trucks. I looked at the thriving businesses that paid rent to Janice, rent she was using to pay for her lifestyle, while my inheritance was supposedly tax-heavy. I am not going to block the road. Janice, I said calmly. Janice let out a breath, a smug little smile touching her lips. I knew you wouldn't. You do not have the stomach for it. I am going to lease it to you. I finished. The smile vanished. Excuse me. I am proposing a formal easement agreement. I said since the plaza requires this land to operate, the plaza can rent the right of way from AM Holdings. We will set the rate at fair market value for commercial access in this zip code. Rent, Janice shrieked. You want to charge your own family rent to dry on a piece of asphalt? I am charging a business entity. I corrected. The Mitchell Family Trust is a business. A Moldings is a business. This is a transaction. I turned to Nora. What is the going rate for a commercial access easement of this square footage? Nora pretended to check her notes. Based on the volume of traffic and the necessity of the access since the plaza is effectively landlocked without it, we are looking at roughly $3,500 a month plus a retroactive assessment for the last 3 years since you took title. Janice looked like she was choking. 3,000? That is extortion. You are trying to bleed us dry. It is business, Janice, I said, echoing the words Derek had used on his Instagram post. If you do not want to pay, that is fine. I will put up a fence on my property line tomorrow. The trucks can park on Main Street and wheel the supplies in through the front doors. I am sure the salon customers will love the smell of fish and garbage passing through the lobby. Janice looked at the Italian restaurant owner, who was now watching us with wide eyes. She realized the position she was in. If the tenants found out she had lost their loading zone, they would sue her for breach of lease. You are a monster, she whispered. Mother would be ashamed of you. Stop, I said. My voice was hard now. Do not bring her into this. If she were here, she would ask why you have been collecting rent on a parking lot you do not own. Janice spun around, furious. I am not signing anything. I'm going to call the city. This alley is a public utility access. You cannot block it. I have permits. Nora and I exchanged a look. Janice had just stepped on the landmine. Permits? Nora asked sweetly. What permits? Janice stopped. She realized she had said too much, but her anger was driving the car now. I repaved this alley last year, she shouted. I pulled the permits for the drainage repair. The city approved it. It is on record. She got into her car and slammed the door. The engine roared and she sped off, gravel spraying against Mr. Henderson's shins. Mr. Henderson dusted off his pats. Well, he said dryly, she is right about one thing. If she pulled permits to improve land she doesn't own, that is a matter of public record. Let's go to City Hall, I said to Nora. An hour later, we were standing at the counter of the Cedar Ridge Department of Public Works. The clerk, a tired, dull-looking woman named Brenda, pulled up the file for the alleyway repairs. Here it is, Brenda said, turning the screen so we could see. Permit application dated last August. Applicant Janice Mitchell, executive, owner, Mitchell Family Trust. Nora took a picture of the screen. There it is, Nora said. She signed a sworn affidavit stating the trust owned the land so she could authorize the repairs. Why would she spend money repairing my land? I asked. She wasn't repairing your land. Nora said she was burying a pipe. Look at the schematic. I leaned in. The permit wasn't just for paving. It was for connecting a drainage line from the plaza's grease trap into the main sewer line, a line that ran directly under the annex's property. She didn't want to pay for a new easement or get your permission, so she just forged the ownership status. Nora said, that is fraud, Aurora, falsifying municipal documents just then. Brenda frowned. Wait a minute. This system has a flag on it. What kind of flag? I asked. The system just updated with the survey data you guys filed this morning. Brenda said it shows a conflict. The permit says trust, but the GIS map says Mitchell Aurora. She looked up at us. If the ownership is contested, the city has to issue a stop order on the use of the infrastructure until it is resolved. I have to send a notice of violation to the applicant. Please do, Nora said as we walked out of City Hall. I felt a strange mixture of victory and sadness. Janice had built her entire operation on shortcuts. She had cut corners on taxes, cut corners on ownership, and cut corners on the truth. She had assumed that because I was quiet, I was blind. I drove back to the annex alone. I needed to think. The fair market offer was still on the table, but I knew Janice wouldn't take it. Her pride was too expensive. I went into the server room and sat at my desk. I opened the drawer where I kept the physical files for the building. I wanted to see the original survey my grandmother had given me when she handed over the deed. I pulled out the yellowing parchment. It was a survey from 1982, and drawn in blue ink. I scanned the lines. There it was. The same boundary Mr. Henderson had found, but there was something else. In the margin, in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting, was a note written in red pen. To Janice. You may use the back road for the trucks, but do not pave it. Easement is permission, not a right. If you forget this, the road closes. I stared at the note. Grandmother had known. She had had this conversation with Janice 30 years ago. She had explicitly warned her. Janice hadn't just forgotten. She had ignored the warning because she thought the old woman was too weak to enforce it. And then, lower down on the page, another note. Aurora, one day she will say it is hers. Show her this. I traced the letters with my finger. My grandmother hadn't just left me a building. She had left me a chronicle of Janice's greed. She had known that Janice would eventually try to consume everything, and she had left bare traps in the grass, waiting for the moment Janice stepped too far. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Janice. Subject unacceptable. Aurora, your little stunt with the surveyor has upset the tenants. I am willing to offer you $500 a month for the road use. That is more than generous. Do not push me. The family is watching." I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. She was still trying to negotiate from a position of power she didn't have. I didn't reply. Instead, I scanned the old survey with the handwritten notes. I attached it to a draft email to Nora. Subject: evidence of permissive use. Nora, file this with the response to her prescriptive easement claim. She was warned 30 years ago. I hit send. The trucks outside were still rumbling, but the sound was different now. It wasn't the sound of commerce rolling over me. It was the sound of tenants driving on a road that I controlled. I had the choke point. I had the fraud evidence. And thanks to Box 519, I had the key to something even bigger. The timeline was accelerating. Janice was fighting on 3 fronts now: the tax lie, the land dispute, and the looming exposure of her theft. She was running out of oxygen, and I was just starting to breathe. The phone call from Elliot Brandt came at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The sky over Cedar Ridge was a flat slate gray, threatening a storm that refused to break. I was in the middle of running a diagnostic on a corrupted server drive for a client, watching lines of code cascade down my monitor like green rain when the device buzzed against the desk. Mr. Brandt did not exchange pleasantries. "Aurora," he said, his voice carrying the gravity of a judge delivering a verdict, "you need to come to my office. The condition has been met." "What condition?" I asked, pausing the diagnostic. "The interference condition," he replied. "Your aunt filed a formal petition this morning regarding the Briar Hollow Annex. She has officially put her claim on the record. That opens the second envelope." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the server room. It was a sensation of being watched, of realizing that a hand from the past was reaching out to move a piece on the board. "I will be there in 20 minutes, I said. When I arrived at Brandon Keller, the atmosphere was different from the last time. There were no family members posturing in the conference room. There was no fake sympathy or aggressive perfume. It was just Mr. Brandt sitting at the head of the heavy mahogany table with a single thick envelope resting in the center of the polished wood. The envelope was sealed with red wax stamped with my grandmother's personal signet, a lark taking flight. I had not seen that seal since I was a child. "Sit down, Aurora," Brandt said softly. I took my seat. The room was silent enough that I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Your grandmother was a woman of foresight," Brandt began, placing his hands on the table. "She knew that grief does strange things to people, but she also knew that greed does terrible things to family. When she drafted her final will, she created what we in the legal profession call a dead man file." "A dead man file," I repeated. "It is a protective measure," Brandt explained. "A set of documents and instructions that remain sealed in secret unless a specific hostile action is taken against the beneficiary. If Janice had accepted the will as written, if she had been content with the house and the trust stipend, this envelope would have been incinerated 10 years from now, unopened." He looked at the wax seal, but she did not accept it. She attacked, and in doing so she pulled the trigger. He pushed the envelope toward me. "You should open it." I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly. The paper was heavy, expensive stock. I broke the wax seal. It snapped with a sharp crack that sounded like a dry bone breaking. Inside, there was a letter written on my grandmother's personal stationery and a smaller velvet pouch. I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, angular, and unwavering. It was not the shaky script of the dying woman I had visited in the hospital. This was written years ago, when she was still a force of nature. Brandt nodded for me to read it. "My dearest Aurora," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and your Aunt Janice has done exactly what I feared she would do. She has come for the annex. I am writing this because I know my daughter. I love her, but I am not blind to her faults. Janice has always believed that appearance is the same as substance. She believes that if she looks rich, she is rich. She believes that if she acts powerful, she is powerful. But a house built on debt is just a cage with nice curtains." I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. It was like she was standing in the room, her hand on my shoulder. "She will tell you that the estate is in trouble." The letter continued. She will use words that sound terrifying. She will likely blame taxes. Janice has always used taxes as a bogeyman to explain away her own mismanagement. She will say the IRS is at the door. She will say she needs to sell the annex to save the family. I looked up at Brant. He was watching me with a sad, knowing expression. She predicted the exact script. "Read on," he said. "Do not believe her," the letter commanded. "If she is demanding the annex for taxes, it is because she needs to cover a hole in her own finances. She does not want to pay the government. Hurrah, she wants to pay her creditors. I have tried to help her. I have bailed her out more times than you know, but a bucket with no bottom cannot be filled. I gave you the annex because it is the only thing I could protect from her appetite. It is yours. Do not sign it away, not for guilt, not for fear, not for family to help you stand your ground. I have left you the truth. In the velvet pouch, you will find the access code to safe deposit box 519 at First Keystone Bank. You may have already found the key I hid in the breaker box. I knew you would fix the electrical first. You were always practical." I let out a shaky breath. She knew. She knew I would check the wiring. She knew I would find the key. It wasn't a scavenger hunt. It was a confirmation of character. "Go to the bank," a letter concluded. "Take Mr. Brant. Show the contents to the judge if you have to. And remember this. The wolf does not knock because he wants to visit. He knocks because he is hungry. Do not open the door. Look, Grandma." I sat there for a long time, the letter resting on my lap. I didn't cry. Tears felt insufficient. This was beyond sadness. This was a transfer of power. My grandmother hadn't just left me property. She had left me armor. I opened the velvet pouch. Inside was a small card with a numeric code and a formal authorization form signed and notarized 5 years ago, granting Aurora Mitchell full access to the box held by the Azad Revenge Trust. She used her maiden name to keep it off Janice's radar. I realized, "Shall we go?" Brant asked, standing up. We drove to the First Keystone Bank in silence. It was the main branch, a marble-columned fortress in the center of town. Brand handled the formalities with the bank manager, presenting the trust documents and the authorization card. When we walked into the vault, the air was cool and smelled of steel and silence. The clerk slid the long metal box out of slot 519 and carried it to a private viewing room. I sat at the small table. I took the key I had found in the annex out of my pocket. I had been carrying it with me every day since I found it and slid it into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I lifted the lid. The box was not full of diamonds or gold coins. It was filled with paper. I pulled out the first document. It was a promissory note legally notarized and dated 4 years ago. I, Janice Mitchell, acknowledge a loan in the amount of $250,000 from the Azad Revenge Trust. I agree to repay this loan in monthly installments of $1,500 starting January 1st. I stared at the number $250,000. She borrowed $250,000. I whispered. Brant leaned in, adjusting his glasses. It appears so. And if you look at the payment schedule attached, I flipped the page. The schedule was a sea of red ink. Missed payment, partial payment. She defaulted 3 years ago. I said, technically. Brant said, since the trust is the lender and you are now the sole trustee of the Azad Revenge Trust, she owes this money to you. I looked deeper into the box. There was a stack of printed emails. My grandmother had printed them out and stapled them together. The subject line of the top email read, "Please, Mom, I need this." I read the text. It was dated 2 weeks before the promissory note was signed. "Mom, you have to help me. The staging business is underwater. The suppliers are going to sue. I just need a bridge loan. I promise I will pay it back. Just sign the check. Do not tell the rest of the family. They will not understand." And then a reply from my grandmother. "I will do this one last time, Janice. But this is it. I am having Mr. Brant draw up a formal loan agreement. No more handouts. You must learn to manage your own affairs." There were more emails, more recent ones. Emails sent just months before she died. "Mom, the tax lien is killing me. Can we reverse mortgage the annex? I can handle the paperwork. You just need to sign. And my grandmother's reply, short and brutal. The annex is not yours to mortgage. It belongs to Aurora. Do not ask me again. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. It wasn't just about money. It was about the harassment. Janice had spent the last years of my grandmother's life badgering her, pressuring her, trying to bleed her dry while she was sick. And when Grandma said no, Janice decided to wait until she was dead to try and steal it from me. She said it was for taxes. I said, my voice hard. She told everyone in the family that the annex was a tax burden, but the only burden is her own debt. She wanted the annex so she could sell it and pay off this $250,000 hole before anyone found out. She was robbing the estate to cover her tracks. Bran agreed. If she had secured the annex, she likely would have sold it quickly, paid off her personal debts, and told the family the money went to the IRS. It was a shell game. I reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out one last item. It was a single index card written in bold black marker. If she says for taxes, ask for the Form 706. Ask for her CPA's license number. Ask for the lien release. She will not have them. I held the card up. She knew exactly what Janice would say. Brant closed the box. Your grandmother was a very sharp woman. She hoped Janice would change. She hoped she wouldn't have to use this. But she prepared for the reality, not the hope. I gathered the documents, the emails, the payment logs. I placed them carefully into my bag. I felt different. When I walked into Brant's office earlier, I had felt like a defender trying to hold on to my property. Now, walking out of the bank vault, I felt like a prosecutor. I didn't just have a defense. I had a weapon. Janice had filed a petition to take the annex. In doing so, she had invited the court to look at the estate's finances. She thought she could control the narrative with tears and lies about taxes. She didn't know that I was bringing the receipts. I turned to Brant as we stepped out into the lobby. What happens now? I asked. Now, Brant said, putting his hat on. We wait for the hearing. She has filed for an emergency injunction to stop you from operating your business at the annex, claiming it endangers the estate's value. We will respond. Let's not just respond. I said, let's counterclaim. I want to call in the debt. Brant smiled. It was a small, sharp smile. I was hoping you would say that. I walked out of the bank and into the storm that had finally broken. Rain was pouring down in sheets, washing the streets of Cedar Ridge clean. I didn't run to my car. I walked. I let the rain hit my face. I thought about the text message. Sign it. I am saving you. I looked at the bank, a massive stone structure that held the truth in its belly. You didn't save me, Janice. I thought, but Grandma did. She didn't just leave me a building. She left me a map out of your trap, and now I was going to follow it all the way to the end. The fallout from Derek's Instagram post was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. Even though the post had been deleted within 30 minutes, the digital footprint remained. Screenshots travel faster than apologies. And by Wednesday morning, the rumors had reached the one group of people I desperately needed to keep calm, my clients. I was sitting in the control room of the annex, staring at a blinking red light on my main communication line. It was Marcus, the chief operations officer for the regional law firm that stored their class action discovery files on my servers. I put on my headset and answered, keeping my voice steady. Good morning, Marcus. I wish it were Aurora, Marcus said, his tone clipped and professional. I just got off the phone with our risk management team. They saw a post circulating on social media suggesting that your facility is distressed. Something about a liquidation sale. It is a misunderstanding, Marcus, I said, typing furiously on my secondary screen to pull up his contract. A family member posted incorrect information. The post has been removed and legal action has been taken to prevent a recurrence. AM Holdings is solvent, secure, and nowhere near a sale. That is good to hear, Marcus replied. But in my business, hearing isn't enough. We are storing sensitive client data with you. If you are going through a probate battle or a bankruptcy, our assets are at risk. He paused. I need a guarantee. Aurora, I am sending an independent auditor down there this afternoon. I need to see proof of ownership, proof of operational continuity, and I need to see that your physical security hasn't been compromised by this family drama. If we are not satisfied, we are triggering the exit clause." My stomach tightened. The exit clause meant they could pull their data and their payments within 24 hours. "I understand, Marcus. The facility is ready. Send your auditor." I hung up. I didn't have time to panic. I had 4 hours to prep for a white glove inspection, but the universe, or perhaps my grandmother's sense of humor, decided that one inspection wasn't enough. At 100, a heavy truck pulled into the side lot. It wasn't the auditor. It was a white pickup truck with the city seal of Cedar Ridge on the door. 2 men in uniforms stepped out. One was wearing a fire marshal's helmet. The other held a clipboard that looked like a weapon. I met them at the service entrance. "MS. Mitchell," the marshal asked. "I am Inspector Kovac. This is Inspector Lewis from Zoning. We are here for the annual compliance check on the commercial hazardous suppression systems and the occupancy permit." I blinked. The inspection was scheduled for next month. "I thought we were on the calendar for November." "I said we were," Kovac said, chewing on an unlit cigar. "But we got a tip this morning about unauthorized structural changes and unsafe storage conditions at this address. When we get a safety complaint, we bump the inspection up." I knew exactly where that tip had come from. Janice, she was trying to weaponize the city against me. She thought that if she reported the building as unsafe, the city would condemn it, forcing me out and allowing her to take control of the ruin to fix it. "Come in, gentlemen," I said, stepping aside. As I held the door, another car screeched into the lot. My heart sank. It was Janice's Mercedes, followed closely by Derek's sports car. They must have been watching the street, waiting for the city truck to arrive. Janice marched up the driveway, waving her hand at the inspectors. "Officers," she called out. "Thank goodness you are here. I am Janice Mitchell. I am the executive of the estate that owns this property." I called in the concern. Kovac looked at her, then at me. "She said she is the executive," Kovac asked me. "She says a lot of things," I replied. Janice reached the door breathless and looking vindicated. "I need to accompany you on this inspection," she told Kovac. "We are very concerned about the state of the building. My niece has been squatting here and we suspect there are fire hazards. We are in the process of transferring the title to pay off tax liens, so we need a clean bill of health before we can sell." She looked at me with a triumphant smirk. She was playing the responsible adult, cleaning up the child's mess. Kovac shrugged. "If you are the owner's representative, you can come. But do not touch anything." I said nothing. I keyed in the biometric code, a 6-digit sequence followed by a fingerprint scan. Janice watched, her eyes widening slightly as the heavy steel door hissed open. We stepped into the vestibule. I had designed the entryway to be a decompression zone. The walls were soundproofed with acoustic foam, and the air was filtered to hospital standards. The transition from the humid, gritty outside world to the sterile, humming interior was always jarring. For Janice and Derek, it was like stepping onto a spaceship. They walked in and their mouths literally dropped open. They were expecting piles of old newspapers and maybe a few dusty computers on card tables. Instead, they were standing in a 12,200 square T-class data center. The raised floor was pristine white tile. The overhead cable trays were organized with military precision. Bundles of blue and yellow fiber optic cables running like arteries along the ceiling. Rows of black server racks stretched down the center of the room, their status lights blinking in a synchronized rhythm of green and amber. The hum was a low, powerful vibration that you felt in your chest. "What is this?" Derek asked, his voice echoing slightly in the acoustic space. Inspector Kovac ignored him. He walked straight to the main fire suppression panel. He opened it and inspected the gauges. "FM 200 system," Kovac noted, nodding with approval. "Clean agent suppression, no water. Good pressure maintenance tags are up to date." He turned to the cooling units. "Redundant HVAC with humidity control." He looked at me. "This is not a warehouse." "MS. Mitchell, this is a Tier 3 data facility." I nodded. "Tier 3 compliant, fully redundant power and cooling. We handle off-site disaster recovery for financial and legal firms." Janice was spinning in a slow circle, looking at the equipment. She looked confused, like a cat that had jumped onto a table expecting a mouse and found a tiger. This is just storage," she stammered. "Mother said it was storage." "It is data storage, Mrs. Mitchell," Kovac corrected, looking at his clipboard. "And according to my files, the permit for this retrofit was pulled 3 years ago. All inspections passed." He walked over to a rack of servers that was humming loudly. Derek walked up to it and tapped the glass door. "So it is just a bunch of hard drives," he scoffed. "What is this? A crypto mining rig, or are you hosting video games? I heard you can make a few bucks doing that." He looked at Kovac. "Look, officer, she is just running a hobby shop in here. It can't be worth that much. We just need to know if we can tear it out to sell the shell." Kovac stopped writing. He looked at Derek with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Son," Kovac said, his voice growling, "do you know what a halon suppression system costs? Just the gas in these tanks is worth more than that car you drove up in." Derek flushed. "And the hardware?" Kovac pointed to the racks. "I inspect the hospital's data center downtown. This setup is cleaner than theirs. If she is running commercial contracts, the liability insurance alone requires a 7-figure bond." Janice stepped forward, her voice sharp. 7 figures. She turned to me. "You do not have 7 figures. You drive a 4-year-old sedan. You rent a 1-bedroom apartment. Do not lie to the inspector." "Aurora, I am not lying," I said calmly, "and I do not spend my money on cars." "Janice, I spend it on infrastructure." Inspector Kovac turned to Janice. "Ma'am, you said you are the executive. I need to verify the ownership for the occupancy permit renewal. Since there is a dispute, I need to see the deed." Janice fumbled with her purse. "I will. The deed is in the trust effectively. We are filing the paperwork to clarify that now. But as I said, the tax situation." I stepped forward. I opened the binder I had prepared for Marcus's auditor. "Here is the original deed." "Inspector," I said, handing him the document. "Recorded 3 years ago. Transfer from Llewellyn Avance to AM Holdings, LLC." I flipped the page. "Here are the articles of organization for AM Holdings. I am the sole member." I flipped the page again. "Here is the card certificate of good standing from the Secretary of State. And here is the tax clearance certificate for the business. No liens, no debts." Kovac took the binder. He scanned the pages. He looked at the seal on the deed. He looked at Janice. "Mrs. Mitchell," Kovac said, his voice dropping the polite tone, "you stated this property was part of an estate with tax liabilities. The record shows it is a private commercial entity with clear title." "But she tricked Mother," Janice shouted, losing her composure. "She stole it. That is why we are here." "That is a civil matter for a judge," Kovac said, handing the binder back to me. "As far as the city of Cedar Ridge is concerned, this building is up to code, and MS. Mitchell is the owner of record." He turned to me. "You passed. Aurora, everything looks tight. Just make sure you keep the rear access clear for the fire lane." I smiled. "We are working on a lease agreement for that right now." Janice looked like she was going to scream. She looked at the servers, then at me. "How much?" she whispered. The greed was cutting through the anger. "How much is this actually worth?" I closed the binder. "I am not going to tell you the valuation of the company, Janice. That is proprietary." Derek laughed nervously. "Come on. It is a couple of computers. What do you make a H100 red grand a year?" I looked at Derek. Then I looked at Janice. I decided it was time to stop being the game moth. The gross revenue for the last fiscal year was $1.2 million. I said net profit after reinvestment was $850,000. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fans. Janice's face went slack. Her eyes darted from the rack to the floor to me. She was doing the math. She was realizing that while she was fighting over a $50,000 tax lien and a dilapidated warehouse shell, I was sitting on a business that generated more cash in a year than her staging company had made in a decade. Derek choked out. "And the contracts I have signed for the next quarter will push that to 1.5. I added, assuming, of course, that my family stops trying to sabotage my reputation with fake tax scares. Janice looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't pity anymore. It wasn't even just anger. It was fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. She realized she wasn't bullying a poor relation. She was attacking a powerhouse. And she had no idea what kind of resources I actually had. "Get out," I said. It wasn't a scream. It was a simple instruction. Janice opened her mouth to speak, but Kovac stepped in. "You heard the owner," he said. "Inspection is over. If you do not have business here, you are trespassing on a secure commercial facility." Janice turned on her heel and walked out. She walked stiffly like a marionette whose strings were being pulled too tight. Derek followed her, looking back at the server racks with a look of hungry confusion. When the door hissed shut behind them, I let out a long breath. Kovac ticked his helmet. "Nice setup, MS. Mitchell, do not let them grind you down." "Thank you, Inspector." He left. I was alone in the hum. I checked the time. Marcus's auditor would be here in 30 minutes. I was ready for him, but as I sat down at my desk, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "Aurora," he said. "Good news. The board reviewed your preliminary security specs. They are impressed." "Thank you, Marcus. But," he continued, his voice serious, "they are still spooked by the legal noise. They want to lock you down, but they want stability." "What are you proposing?" I asked. "We want to offer you a 5-year exclusive contract for our archival storage. Marcus said it is worth $4 million over the term." My heart skipped a beat. $4 million. That would secure my future. That would secure the building forever. "But," Marcus added, "and there is always a but. There is a contingency. We need a clean title opinion. We need a court order dismissing any and all claims against the property from your family. And we need it signed within 7 days. If the dispute is still active next Friday, we have to go with a competitor in Ohio." 7 days. I repeated. 7 days. "Aurora, can you do it?" I looked at the server racks. I looked at the binder with the deed. I thought about the key to box 519 and the IOU sitting in my bag. "I have the evidence," I said. "Then get a judge to stamp it," Marcus said. "The clock is ticking." I hung up. Janice thought she was racing against the IRS. She was wrong. She was racing against me. And now I had $4 million reason to finish this race in record time. I picked up the phone and dialed Nora. "Nora," I said, "file a motion for the summary judgment and request an emergency hearing. We are not waiting for next month. We are going to court this week." "Why the rush?" Nora asked. "Because I just got an offer that changes everything," I said. "And I am tired of playing defense. It is time to drop the hammer." The notification from the county clerk's office arrived at 8:00 in the morning, hitting my inbox with the dull thud of a digital gavel. It was a single PDF, but it weighed enough to crush a $4 million contract. Notice of list pendants. I stared at the Latin term list pendants, suit pending. In the world of property law, it was a red flag planted directly in the center of my livelihood. It told the world, and more importantly title insurance companies, that the ownership of the Briar Hollow Annex was in dispute. It rendered the property effectively unsellable and uninsurable until the court case was resolved. 10 minutes later, Marcus called. I saw the filing. "Aurora," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth he had shown the day before, "our risk department is flagging the contract. We cannot execute a long-term storage agreement on a facility that is subject to active litigation regarding its ownership. I can fix this." "Marcus," I said, gripping the phone tight. "It is a frivolous claim. It is a cloud on the title." He corrected. "You have 5 days left on our verbal deadline. If that list pendants is not lifted by close of business Tuesday, we walk." He hung up. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling the walls of Janice's trap closing in. She knew she couldn't win on the tax lie. She knew she couldn't win on the road easement, so she had decided to burn the whole house down. If she couldn't have the annex, she would make sure I couldn't profit from it either. I drove to Nora's office. The rain from the previous days had cleared, leaving a sharp, bright sunlight that felt mocking. Nora was already reading the petition Janice had filed to support the list pendants. Her face was pale with controlled rage. "You need to read this," she said, sliding the document across the desk. "But brace yourself. It is ugly." I picked it up. Petition to set aside transfer of deed due to undue influence and lack of capacity. I began to read. The petitioner, Janice Mitchell, alleges that the respondent, Aurora Mitchell, used her position of trust to isolate the deedant, Elena Vance, during her final years. The petitioner asserts that the respondent systematically restricted family access to the deedant, poisoning her mind against her natural children, and coerced the transfer of the Briar Hollow Annex at a time when the deedant was medicated, confused, and suffering from cognitive decline. I felt the blood drain from my face. "She is saying I manipulated her," I whispered. "She is saying I took advantage of my grandmother's dementia." "It gets worse," Norris said. Look at paragraph 12. The respondent, having failed to secure gainful employment suitable to her station, preyed upon the deedant fears of abandonment to secure financial assets. I slammed the paper down. I was the only one there. I shouted, my voice cracking. I was the one who drove her to chemotherapy. I was the one who sat with her when she woke up scared in the middle of the night. Janice was in Carbo. Janice was at brunch. She visited once a month for 20 minutes to ask for a check. "I know," Nora said softly. "I know, Aurora. She is rewriting history," I said, shaking. "She is turning my love into a crime." "This is the nuclear option," Nora said. "When you can't argue the law, you argue the morality." She is banking on the fact that undue influence is hard to disprove. It is a he said, she said situation. She wants to drag this out for months, forcing you to settle just to get the list pendants removed so you can save your business. She does not know about the contract. I said she just knows. I have revenue. She is trying to choke me out. She is trying to break you. Nora corrected. But she made a mistake. She made it factual. She claimed medical incapacity. That gives us the right to discovery on the medical records. Nora pulled a thick stack of files from her credenza. "I already called Dr. Aries," she said, "my grandmother's neurologist. He is retired, but he remembers your grandmother vividly. He remembers her because she was the sharpest patient in his ward." Nora opened the file. "I have the mini mental state examination scores from the week she signed the deed. She scored a 29 out of 30. That is not dementia, Aurora. That is better than most 40-year-olds. That handles the capacity argument," I said. "But what about the undue influence? What about the isolation?" The door opened and Elliot Brandt walked in. He looked more like a disappointed grandfather than a lawyer today. He carried a briefcase that looked as old as he was. "I will handle that," Brandt said, taking a seat. I looked at him. "Mr. Brandt, I have been deposed in undue influence cases before." "Aurora," he said, setting his hat on the table, "it is a nasty business. But in this case, Janice has forgotten a crucial detail of my practice, which is I videotape the execution of every will and major deed transfer for clients over the age of 70. He said, "It is a policy I'd instituted specifically to prevent vultures like your aunt from circling after the funeral." He tapped his briefcase. "I have the recording of the day she signed the deed to the annex. In that video, I specifically ask her, 'Elena, has anyone promised you anything in exchange for this? Has anyone threatened you? Why are you giving this to Aurora and not Janice?'" "And what did she say?" I asked, holding my breath. She looked right at the camera. Brandt said, a small smile touching his lips. "And she said because Aurora is the only one who never asked for it." I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. "So, we have the medical records," I said. "We have the video and we have the motive," Graham said, stepping into the room. I hadn't heard him come in. The forensic accountant was standing by the door, holding a tablet. He looked tired but energized, like a vampire who had just found a particularly rich vein. I finished the analysis of the loan payments and the staging company's books. Graham said Janice is not just in debt. Aurora, she is insolvent. "Bad?" I asked. "She is running a Ponzi scheme on her own life." Graham said she uses the deposit from client A to pay the vendor for client B. She uses the credit card to pay the mortgage and the loan to pay the credit card, but the music stopped when your grandmother died." He walked over to the table and placed the tablet down. "I found something else. The reason she is so desperate for the annex isn't just the money. It is the collateral." "Explain." Nora said. "She took out a hard money loan 6 months ago. Graham said a predatory lender, high interest, short term. She listed the Briar Hollow Annex as a pending asset on the application. She told them she already inherited it. She committed loan fraud. I asked, she sold them a promise she couldn't keep. Graham said that loan is due in 3 weeks. If she doesn't deliver the title or the cash, they will come for her personal assets, her house, her car, everything. That is why she filed the list pendants. I realized she is stalling the lenders. She is trying to show them she is fighting for the asset. It is a desperate throw." Graham agreed. "But it gives us the narrative. She isn't suing because you manipulated your grandmother. She is suing because she manipulated a loan shark." "We have enough," Nora said, looking at the assembled team, the medical records, the video, the financial motive. "We can crush this petition. But can we do it in 5 days?" I asked. "Marcus won't wait for trial." Nora hesitated. "A full trial takes months. We need a shortcut. We need an injunction. We need to convince a judge that her petition is so meritless, so bad faith, that it warrants immediate dismissal and sanctions. To do that," Bragg said, "we need something that proves malice, not just greed. Malice. We need proof that she knows she is lying." My phone buzzed. I looked down. It was my cousin Mallory. I hadn't spoken to Mallory since the day of the inspection when she had watched me reveal the server room revenue. "Can we talk?" The text read, "I am at the coffee shop near your office alone." I looked at Nora. "I have to go." I said. I found Mallory sitting in the back corner of the coffee shop, nervously shredding a paper napkin. She looked different. The polished real estate shark veneer was cracked. She wasn't wearing her usual power blazer. She was in a hoodie and jeans. I sat down across from her. "I heard about the list pendants," Mallory said, not making eye contact. "News travels fast." I said. "It does when Janice is bragging about it." Mallory said she told the whole family. She locked it down. "She said you were trying to sell the annex to a foreign company and run away with the money." "She is lying." Mallory. "I know." Mallory said. She looked up then and I saw the fear in her eyes. "I know she is lying. Aurora, because she tried to get me to lie too." "What do you mean?" "After the inspection," Mallory said, her voice shaking. "When we saw the servers, when we saw the money, Janice lost it. She came to my office. She screamed at me. She said it was my fault for not checking the property values earlier. She said I was a terrible real estate agent." Mallory took a sip of coffee, her hand trembling. "She told me I had to write an affidavit." Mallory continued. "She wanted me to sign a statement saying I had witnessed you yelling at Grandma, that I had seen you refuse to let family visit." "And did you?" I asked, my heart hammering. "No," Mallory said. "I told her that was perjury. I told her I wouldn't lose my license for her. And what did she do? She told me that if I didn't help her, she would ruin me. She said she would tell everyone that I was the one who advised her to take the loan from Grandma's accounts. She tried to frame me for her embezzlement." Aurora. I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. "She is drowning." Mallory. "She is pulling everyone down with her. You do not have to be one of them." Mallory pulled her hand away. She unlocked her phone. "I am not doing this for you," she said, her voice brittle. "I am doing this because I have a daughter to support. I cannot go to jail for Janice." She opened her text messages and scrolled back. "This is from 2 days ago," she said right before she filed the petition. She spun the phone around. The message was from Janice. "I do not care if it is true or not. Mallory, just say it is for taxes. Everyone is scared of the IRS. If we muddy the waters enough, she will settle. I just need the title for a month to satisfy the lenders. Just sign the paper." There it was, the smoking gun in black and white. "I do not care if it is true. I just need the title. Can I have this?" I asked. Mallory hesitated, then nodded. She tapped the screen and sent the screenshot to my phone. "You never got it from me," she whispered. "I won't say a word," I promised. Valerie stood up. She looked at me, and for a second I saw the cousin I used to play with in the backyard before the money and the status games tore us apart. "Beat her, Aurora," she said. "Please just beat her." I walked back to Nora's office. The wind was kicking up again, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt the heat of the phone in my pocket. I walked into the conference room. Nora, Brandt, and Graham were still strategizing. "Stop planning," I said. I threw my phone onto the table, the image of the text message glowing on the screen. "We have it," I said. "Malice, intent to defraud, conspiracy to coerce." Nora picked up the phone. She read the text. Her eyes widened. "Where did you get this?" "It fell off a truck," I said. "Is it enough?" Nora looked at Brandt. Brandt looked at the text and let out a low, satisfied hum. "This is not just enough for a defense," Brandt said. "This is enough for an ex parte hearing. This proves that the lease pendants was filed fraudulently to leverage a settlement. It is an abuse of process." Nora stood up, her energy shifting from defensive to predatory. "I am filing an emergency motion for injunctive relief," she said. "We are going to ask the judge to strike the list pendants immediately, sanction Janice for bad faith filing, and issue a temporary restraining order preventing her from contacting you or your clients." When I asked now, Nora said, "I will call the judge's clerk. We are alleging irreparable harm to your business. With the contract deadline, we have grounds for an expedited hearing." She looked at me. "Pack your bag, Aurora. We are going to court tomorrow morning." I looked at the team around the table, the lawyer, the accountant, the witness, and the ghost of my grandmother, present in every document and every strategy we had built. Janice wanted to play the moral card. She wanted to talk about family values and protecting the elderly. Fine. I thought, let's talk about values. Let's talk about truth. I picked up my phone and looked at the screenshot one last time. Everyone is scared of the IRS. Janice was right about fear, but she was wrong about the source. She shouldn't be afraid of the tax man. She should be afraid of the quiet girl who had spent 3 years building a fortress while she was busy digging a grave. "I am ready," I said. Nora picked up her briefcase. "Then let's go get your inheritance back." The deposition room was colder than the morgue had been. It was a windowless box on the 14th floor of a blast tower filled with the rhythmic staccato clicking of the stenographer's machine. That sound was the only thing keeping me grounded as I watched my Aunt Janice perform the greatest role of her life. She sat across the table, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief that I recognized from my grandmother's drawer. "I only wanted to help her," Janice said, her voice trembling just enough to register as sincere on the audio recording. "Aurora has always been distant, disconnected from the family values. When Mother passed, I knew the tax burden would crush her. I was trying to absorb the blow. I was willing to take on the debt myself to protect my niece." Her lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Sterling, who wore a suit that shimmered under the fluorescent lights, nodded sympathetically. "And did you ask MS. Mitchell to sign the property over?" Sterling asked. "I did." Janice sniffed. "I begged her. Not for me, for the legacy, but she refused. She has been confused. I believe the grief has clouded her judgment." I sat next to Nora, my hands clenched so tight under the table that my fingernails were biting into my palms. It took every ounce of my professional discipline not to scream. She was painting me as a mentally unstable child and herself as the martyr, all while trying to steal a multi-million-dollar asset to pay off a loan shark. Nora placed a hand on my forearm, a silent signal to breathe. "Mr. Sterling looked at me then, his eyes cold. "We are done with the petitioner," he said. "We can take a recess before we depose the respondent." We walked out into the hallway. The air was stale, recycled through vents that probably hadn't been cleaned in a decade. I leaned against the wall, trying to shake the image of Janice's fake tears from my mind. "She is good," I whispered. "She is a sociopath," Nora corrected, checking her watch. "But sociopaths get sloppy when they think they are winning." Just then, Mr. Sterling approached us. He didn't look like a man who wanted a fight. He looked like a man who wanted a golf game. "MS. Baines," he said, smoothing his tie. "Look, We all know how these probate battles end. The only people who win are the lawyers. My client is willing to offer an olive branch. I straightened up. What kind of branch? A settlement, Sterling said. A 5,050 split of the Briar Hollow Annex. Janice drops the undue influence petition, lifts the list pendants, and acknowledges Aurora's partial ownership. In exchange, Aurora deeds 50% of the property to the Mitchell Family Trust. They run it as partners. He smiled, showing too many teeth. It is a fair deal. MS. Mitchell, you keep your business. The family gets their share. Everyone walks away with dignity. For a second, the exhaustion washed over me. It sounded so easy. Just sign a paper, give her half, and the lawsuit vanishes. The $4 million contract with Marcus would be safe. The stress would end. But then I looked at Nora. She wasn't smiling. I looked back at Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice steady. Do you know where a remediation clause is in a data security contract? Sterling blinked. Excuse me. If I allow a partner onto the deed who has a history of financial judgments and active tax liens, I immediately violate the compliance standards of every single one of my clients. I explained my contracts require a clean chain of custody and ownership. I stepped closer to him. Giving Janice 50% doesn't save the business. It kills it. The moment her name touches that title, my client's exit, the revenue drops to zero, and we are left with an empty warehouse that Janice can't sell because of her own liens. Sterling's smile faltered. It is a generous offer, he pressed. The alternative is a trial that could take months. Can you afford to be bled dry? MS. Mitchell, I can afford the truth. I said, no settlement. We see you in court. Sterling shrugged, his mask of civility slipping just a fraction. Have it your way. He walked back into the deposition room. Nora looked at me with pride. That was a trap, she said. A soft trap. She wanted to co-opt the asset so she could use her 50% share as collateral for her lenders. She would have leveraged her half, defaulted, and the bank would have foreclosed on the whole building, forcing a partition sale. You would have lost everything. I know, I said. Bradmar warned me. The wolf does not knock because he wants to visit. We left the deposition an hour later. We didn't give them anything. When they asked me about undue influence, I simply referred them to the medical records and the video logs. I was boring. I was factual. I was a wall they couldn't climb. Back at Brandt's office, the atmosphere was kinetic. Graham was pacing in front of a whiteboard covered in red ink. Brandt was sitting at his desk, polishing his glasses with a slow, deliberate rhythm. We have the numbers finalized for the hearing, Graham said as we walked in. He tapped the board. I reconstructed the tax argument Janice is using. It is a fabrication, Aurora. But it is a specific kind of fabrication. Explain, I said, sitting down. She claims the estate owes $300,000 in taxes. Graham said, that is the number she keeps throwing around. But the estate's total value, excluding the annex, is only $600,000. The exemption is $12 million. The tax should be zero. So where does the $300,000 come from? I asked. It comes from her liabilities. Graham said, I found the shadow ledgers for her staging company. She has a balloon payment due on a business line of credit. $280,000. He circled the number. She isn't trying to pay the IRS. She is trying to pay regional capital lending. If she misses that payment next week, they trigger a confession of judgment. They seize her personal home. So, she needs the annex to pay the bank, not the government. I said, exactly, Graham said, and she needs it now. That is why she offered the settlement. She needs an asset on her balance sheet to show the bank she has equity. Brandt put his glasses back on. It is time to play our card, he said. He picked up a file. Inside was the letter my grandmother had left in the dead man envelope, the one predicting Janice's tax lies. I am filing this as Exhibit A for the emergency hearing. Brandt said, we are submitting it under the premise of rebutting the undue influence claim. It demonstrates that the deedant was not only of sound mind, but was acutely aware of the petitioner's financial predatory habits. He handed the file to his paralegal. File it. electronic service to opposing counsel immediately. I watched the paralegal leave. I knew what would happen when Sterling read that letter. It wouldn't just be a legal blow. It would be a psychological one. It proved that my grandmother had seen right through Janice's mask from the grave. The reaction came faster than I expected. That evening, I was at the annex running a final security patch on the servers. The building was dark, lit only by the blue LEDs of the racks. My phone pinged. It was an email, not from Sterling, from Janice. Subject, please read. Urgent. I opened it. There was no text in the body, just an attachment. It was a document titled Temporary Holding Agreement. I opened the PDF. It was a quitclaim deed, hastily typed. It transferred the annex to Janice for a period of 30 days with a promise to transfer it back after tax clearance. A text message followed immediately. Aurora, please, Mr. Sterling is making this too complicated. I just need to show the deed to the IRS auditor tomorrow morning to stop the seizure. If you sign this temporary hold, I can show them I have control, and they will back off. I will tear it up next week. I swear on Mother's grave. Just sign it and email it back. I am trying to save us. I stared at the screen. Temporary hold. There was no such thing in property law. Once a deed is recorded, it is done. If I signed this, she would record it instantly. She would use it to secure her loan. And when she defaulted, the bank would take my building. She thinks I'm stupid. I realized she thinks I am still the little girl who doesn't understand business stuff. I forwarded the email to Nora with a note. Add this to the evidence pile. Attempted fraud. Then I replied to Janice. Aunt Janice, all communication must go through counsel. Please do not contact me directly. I put the phone down. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just cold. She was swearing on her mother's grave to steal from her mother's chosen heir. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mallory. She is spiraling. Mallory wrote. She just called me screaming. She knows about the letter Brandt filed. She knows Grandma wrote it. What did she say? I asked. She said the letter is a forgery. Mallory replied. She wants me to testify that Grandma couldn't write in her last months. She wants me to lie about her arthritis, and I told her to go to hell. Mallory wrote, I am sending you the voice memo of her asking me to lie. Give it to the judge. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. The walls were crumbling. Janice was running out of allies. The next morning was the day before the hearing. I was in Nora's office finalizing the exhibit list. We had the letter. We had the forensic report. We had the text messages. We had Mallory's testimony. We were ready. The receptionist buzzed in. MS. Spain. There is a courier here from First Keystone Bank. He says he has a sealed delivery for the trustee of the Eleanor Vance Trust. Nora looked at me. A delivery. I didn't request anything. I said send him in. Nora said. The courier walked in carrying a heavy, rigid envelope. It was marked confidential. Court eyes only. He handed it to me. This was triggered by the subpoena your lawyer filed regarding the box contents. The courier said the bank's compliance officer found a secondary instruction on the lease agreement for box 519. What instruction? I asked. The courier looked at his clipboard. The instruction states that if the box is accessed by the beneficiary due to a legal dispute, and if that dispute proceeds to a court filing, a second sealed packet is to be released. I looked at the envelope. My grandmother had prepared for the skirmish, but she had also prepared for the war. I started to open it. Wait, Norris said. Grabbing my hand, I looked at her. Look at the stamp, Norris said. I looked. To be opened only in the presence of a presiding judge. If you open that now, Norris said, her voice hushed. It is inadmissible. It is tampered evidence. Whatever is in there, your grandmother wanted it to be the final word. She wanted the judge to see it at the same moment Janice does. I felt the weight of the packet. It was heavier than paper. There was something solid inside. Drive a tape. She knew Janice would fight the letter. I said, realizing the depth of the strategy. She knew Janice would call it a forgery, so she left something that cannot be forged. We take it to court tomorrow, Norris said. We submit it blind. It is a risk, I said. We do not know what is in it. Do you trust her? Moore asked. I thought about the woman who had taught me to hide my value, the woman who had given me a ruin and told me to build a fortress, the woman who had loved me when the rest of the family saw a failure. Yes, I said. I trust her. Then we play it blind, Nora said. I put the sealed packet into my bag right next to the IOU. The deposition had been a skirmish. The settlement offer had been a trap. But tomorrow was the checkmate. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there Janice was probably meeting with Mr. Sterling, trying to come up with a way to explain away the letter. She was probably telling herself that she could still win, that she could still charm the judge, that she could still bully me into submission. She didn't know about the second envelope. She didn't know that the dead man switch had a secondary charge. I am ready, Grandma, I whispered to the glass. I turned back to Nor. Let's go home, I said. I need to get a good night's sleep. I want to look fresh when I watch her lose. The courtroom was silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that smelled of floor wax and old judgments. Judge Harrison sat behind the high bench, his face unreadable as he reviewed the motion papers. To my left sat Nora, calm and predatory. To my right, the empty gallery, save for Marcus's auditor, who had come to witness the title clearance, and my cousin Mallory, who sat in the back row with her head bowed. Across the aisle, Janice sat with Mr. Sterling. She was wearing a modest gray suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked smaller than usual, but when the judge nodded for her to begin, she stood up and inflated with that familiar theatrical self-righteousness. Your Honor, Janice began, her voice trembling with carefully calibrated emotion. This petition is not about money. It is about duty. For the last 5 years, while my niece was absent, living her own life, I was the one by my mother's bedside. I managed her pills. I managed her appointments. I managed the crushing weight of her estate. She turned to look at me, a tear tracking perfectly down her cheek. I promised my mother I would protect the family legacy. Janice continued, the tax situation is dire. The IRS is circling. I asked Aurora to transfer the annex solely so I could leverage it to pay the estate's debts. I was trying to fall on the grenade for her, and in return, she accuses me of theft. She locks me out of the property I helped build. It is a tragedy, Your Honor, that greed has blinded a daughter's love. She sat down, dabbing her eyes. It was a good performance. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed her. Mr. Sterling stood up. We rest on the petition, Your Honor. The medical incapacity is clear. The urgency of the tax lien requires immediate equitable relief. Judge Harrison turned to Nora. MS. Baines. Nora stood up. She didn't use emotional inflection. She didn't cry. She picked up a single piece of paper. Your Honor, Nora said, her voice cutting through the humid air of the courtroom. The petitioner speaks of taxes as if they are a feeling, but taxes are mathematics, and the math in this petition does not add up. She walked to the podium. We have submitted into evidence the estate valuation. The total assets are well below the federal exemption of $12 million. There is no estate tax. There is no inheritance tax burden on the estate itself. The lien the petitioner speaks of is a phantom. It does not exist in the federal registry. It does not exist in the state registry. Nora turned to face Janice. The only liens that exist, Your Honor, are personal judgments against Janice Mitchell and her company, Mitchell Interiors. We have submitted certified copies of 3 separate judgments totaling over $100,000, as well as a default notice from a hard money lender dated 2 weeks ago. Objection, Sterling shouted, standing up. The petitioner's personal finances are not relevant to the capacity of the deedant. They are relevant to motive, Your Honor, Nora countered smoothly. The petitioner claims she needs the annex to pay the IRS. We assert she needs the annex to satisfy a predatory loan that is due in 4 days. This is not a rescue mission. It is a liquidation event disguised as a probate dispute. The judge looked at Sterling over his glasses. Overruled. I will hear the evidence. Nora called Mr. Brandt to the stand. The old lawyer walked slowly, his cane tapping against the floor. He took the oath with the gravity of a man who held the law as a religion. Mr. Brandt, Nora asked, as the drafting attorney of the will, did Elena Vance ever express confusion about the Briar Hollow Annex? Never, Brack said firmly. She was explicit. She viewed the annex as a separate entity distinct from the family trust. And regarding the petitioner's status, Noor asked, Janice Mitchell is not and has never been the executive. Brandt stated, the First Keystone Bank is the executive. When Ms. Mitchell attempted to seize control of the assets in my office last week, I informed her of this. I told her, and I quote from my contemporaneous notes, that is not how this works. She attempted to bypass the legal chain of command using a power of attorney that expired at the moment of death. Brandt looked at Janice. The documents she presented to Aurora, the tax schedules, the urgency, were drafted with haste and contained basic legal errors that no competent professional would make. They were props, not filings. Janice shifted in her seat. Her face was losing its tragic composure. The corners of her mouth were tightening. Nora thanked Brandt and called Graham Ives. Graham set up his easel. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at the charts. I have conducted a forensic trace of the deedance accounts. Graham said, we found a pattern of withdrawals labeled consulting fees paid to the petitioner's company, but more importantly, we found a promissory note. Graham held up the document we had retrieved from the safe deposit box. 5 years ago, the petitioner borrowed $250,000 from the Eleanor Vance Trust. She defaulted on this loan 3 years ago. The judge leaned forward. $250,000. Yes, Your Honor, Graham said. And here is the critical accounting detail. If Janice Mitchell were to acquire the title to the annex, she would effectively become the owner of the trust assets. She would become her own creditor by taking the annex. She would not only gain a property to sell, she would legally extinguish her own debt to the estate. It is a wash trade designed to erase a liability. The courtroom buzzed. Even Sterling looked surprised. He hadn't known about the IOU. Janice had lied to her own lawyer. And finally, Graham added, regarding the CPA named Arthur Davis, who advised the petitioner, I ran a check with the state board. There is no licensed CPA by that name associated with the firm listed. The phone number used to threaten Ms. Mitchell traces to a burner application registered to the petitioner's personal cell phone. Sterling put his head in his hands. Nora returned to the table. We have one final piece of evidence, Your Honor. She picked up the sealed packet from the bank, the second envelope. This packet was lodged with the First Keystone Bank by the deedant to be released only upon the commencement of litigation by a family member. It was sealed until this morning. We have not reviewed it. We asked the court to review it in camera, or if the court pleases to publish it to the record. The judge looked at the packet. He looked at Janice, who was now gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. Open it, the judge ordered. Nora broke the seal. Inside was a small silver USB drive and a handwritten index card. Nora handed the card to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. The judge read it, his eyebrows raising. Play the drive, the judge said. Nora plugged the drive into the court's media system. Static filled the room for a second, and then a voice cut through. Clear, sharp, undeniable. It was Janice's voice. It was a voicemail she had left for someone, perhaps the fake CPA, perhaps a friend. But my grandmother must have intercepted it or recorded it during a call. Mom is losing it, but she is stubborn. She won't sign the check. But I have a plan for the niece. Once the old lady is gone, I will hit Aurora with the tax scare. She is soft. She does not know business. I will tell her the IRS is coming to take the house. Just scare her with the lien, and she will sign anything to get out of trouble. I will have that annex sold, and the money in my account before the funeral flowers wilt. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was the vacuum left after a bomb goes off. Janice was frozen. She wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at the USB drive as if it were a snake that had just bitten her. She had been caught in her own voice, detailing the exact conspiracy she had just denied under oath. My grandmother hadn't just predicted the move. She had caught the rehearsal. Judge Harrison took off his glasses. He looked at Janice with an expression of profound distaste. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, his voice dangerously low, do you have any rebuttal to the voice of your client conspiring to defraud the beneficiary? Sterling stood up slowly. He gathered his papers. Your Honor, I request a brief recess to consult with my client regarding her plea in the sanctions phase. Request denied. The judge snapped. I have heard enough. He slammed his gavel down. A sound like a gunshot. The petition to set aside deed is dismissed with prejudice. The claim of undue influence is found to be baseless and filed in bad faith. He turned to the clerk. The list pendants on the property known as the Briar Hollow Annex is hereby vacated, effective immediately. The title is clear and quieted in the name of Aurora Mitchell and A.M. Holdings. He turned back to Janice. Mrs. Mitchell, this court finds that you have engaged in an abuse of the probate process. You have attempted to weaponize the legal system to cover your own financial malfeasance. I am issuing an immediate injunction preventing you from coming within 500 ft of the property or the respondent. Furthermore, the judge continued, his voice rising, I am referring the record of this hearing, specifically the evidence regarding the forged tax documents and the fraudulent CPA to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into fraud and attempted grand larceny, and regarding the $250,000 you owe the trust. I am entering a summary judgment in favor of the estate. You will pay it back, Mrs. Mitchell, even if we have to garnish every cent you make for the rest of your life. Court is adjourned. The gavel hit again. Janice collapsed back into her chair. She looked like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Mallory in the back row stood up and walked out without looking back. She was free. She hadn't lied. I stood up. My legs felt steady. My hands were not shaking. I walked toward the exit. Janice looked up as I passed. Her face was a ruin of mascara and panic. She reached out a hand, grasping at my sleeve. "Or," she whispered, her voice cracking, "please, you cannot let them investigate me. I will go to jail. We can work this out. I can sell the house. I can pay you part of it. We are family." I stopped. I looked at her hand on my arm, the hand that had slid the fake tax bill across the table, the hand that had tried to steal my future. I gently removed her hand from my sleeve. I looked her in the eye. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt clarity. Family isn't what you claim. "Janice," I said, my voice quiet but filling the space between us. "It is what you do. And you have done enough." I turned and walked away. I walked out of the courtroom and into the wide marble hallway. The sun was streaming through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Marcus's auditor was waiting for me by a bench. He was holding a leather folder. "Did you get the order?" he asked. I handed him the certified copy of the judgment the clerk had just stamped. "List pendants vacated. Case dismissed." He scanned it. He nodded. "This works," he said. "The title is clean." He opened the folder and laid it on the bench. Inside was the contract. 5 years, $4 million. The future of AM Holdings. I took the pen. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name, Aurora Mitchell, in bold, black ink. The auditor shook my hand. "Congratulations, MS. Mitchell. We will begin the data migration on Monday." "Thank you," I said as he walked away. I saw the double doors of the courtroom open. Mr. Sterling walked out, looking exhausted. Behind him, Janice walked slowly, flanked by 2 Bates, who were escorting her to the clerk's office to process the judgment. She looked across the hall and saw me. She saw the contract in my hand. She saw the auditor walking away. For a moment our eyes met. There was no more pretense, no more taxes, no more saving me. She saw me for the first time, not as the niece she could bully, but as the CEO she had failed to destroy. I didn't smile. I just nodded once, a dismissal. I turned and walked toward the elevators. I had work to do. I had a business to run. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the universe, I knew my grandmother was smiling. She had left me a ruin, but we had built a fortress, and the wolf was finally gone from the door. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from today. Drop a comment below with your city or country and let's share our thoughts on Aurora's victory. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel. Like the video, and if you really want to support us, hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people. Thanks to all.